Chapter 780. Where had Supreme Cloud gone? This was His Majesty's question. Although he was angry and they were in an extremely private place like the royal study, His Majesty no longer dared to call Yun Yang, this brat, that little bastard, or that little bastard, when he mentioned Yun Yang. He had to address him respectfully as Supreme Cloud. This was the respect that he had earned through his meritorious deeds. Even His Majesty was no exception. The Emperor of Yutong was Yutong's top man, but Supreme Cloud was a legend of this world. This was the difference between a man and a god. Thinking about it, His Majesty's gaze towards Yun Xiaoyao grew even more ferocious, as if he was looking at the enemy who had killed his father. The empire is in such turmoil now, why is he hiding at home? He informed me 2 days ago and went to the front line of the western border. Yun Xiaoyao shrunk his neck and shrunk his body into the chair obediently. He tried his best to shrink, to reduce his presence in front of his royal brother. Even if the Emperor of Yutong's cultivation base was shallow and he might not be able to withstand a single breath from Yun Xiaoyao, the coercion of a superior and most importantly, his elder brother's authority made King Yun shudder like a cicada in winter. Oh, he's gone to the front line. Sigh, Lord Supreme Cloud is truly dedicated to the nation and the people, always charging to the front line. Qiu Jianhan coughed, trying his best to ease the tense atmosphere. Yes, yes. Leng Daoyin and Fang Qingtian agreed dryly. Under normal circumstances, or rather, under most circumstances, when 3 of the capital's top rogues joined hands to smooth things over, especially when the person involved was the Emperor of Yutong's most precious younger brother, the matter should have been resolved into nothing. Even the process of the punishment being lifted high and lowered lightly would have been omitted. However, this time, it was obviously an exception to most circumstances. His Majesty did not speak or move. His posture and actions did not change in the slightest. He remained seated on the throne like a raging lion, his eyes fixed on Yun Xiaoyao with deep hatred. Yun Xiaoyao was, of course, uncomfortable. It was not that he did not try to turn his head to avoid eye contact, but the prickling sensation was worse than direct eye contact. He could not help turning his head back, only to meet the Emperor's cold, gleaming eyes. Just as he was about to speak, he felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. Forcing himself to remain calm, he asked, Why are you looking at me like that? Why is he looking at you like that? Why are you still asking? You still have the cheek to ask? His Majesty gritted his teeth, and his voice came out from between his teeth. He said coldly, the reason is simple. It's because you're handsome, and I like you. Every word of this sentence was teasing. In this kind of context and atmosphere, it was exceptionally creepy and made one's hair stand on end. Yun Xiaoyao chuckled dryly and coughed. He laughed dryly and said, You flatter me, royal brother. This humble brother's only face is passable. The Emperor gritted his teeth and said with a twisted expression, You're flattering me. Other than this face, you still have one thing that you're most proud of. You've raised a good son who has saved the entire empire of Yutong. The conversation took a sudden turn, turning into a hostile atmosphere. All in all, it was extremely out of place. Qiu Jianhan, Leng Daoyin, and Fang Qingtian shrank back into their chairs tactfully and did not move, trying their best to reduce their presence. They watched the confrontation between the 2 brothers innocently. If it's possible, this old man doesn't even want to listen to it. I'll retire and return to my hometown to enjoy the rest of my life. You can't blame me for being cowardly. This is a place of trouble, too dangerous. Yun Xiaoyao felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He chuckled dryly and said, Isn't that your nephew? Just a little bit of credit, it's not worth mentioning. I've done far from enough. Royal brother, you're flattering me. His Majesty did not even have the slightest hint of a smile on his face. He said coldly, How is this flattering? You've done so much, yet it's still far from enough. It's obvious that there's too much to mention. I'll only ask you this. A few days ago, I asked you if you knew who Supreme Cloud was. How did you answer me? Yun Xiaoyao hummed and lowered his head. He was speechless for a long time. Raise your head. His Majesty shouted like a thunderclap. His voice shook the entire imperial study room for a moment. The four of them lifted their heads in unison. Then, Qiu Jianhan and the other two lowered their heads again. Cough, I didn't hear you. Yun Xiaoyao was sweating profusely. Royal brother, this, what do you mean by this and that? The king was furious. Have I asked you 800 times about this? Is your son, Yin Yang, Supreme Cloud? You promised me, you confided in me, you promised me again and again, you even swore in our father's name. He took a few deep breaths and slammed the table. But today, it seems like you're not surprised at all. Yun Xiaoyao quickly put on a dumbfounded expression and said, at that time, you really don't know what's good for you. His Majesty interrupted Yun Xiaoyao's quibble and spat at him. How dare you? Do you think that because your cultivation base is high and you have a good son, you don't care about me, your elder brother, anymore? Do you think that you can do whatever you want to do to me and fool me however you want? Yun Xiaoyao's hands trembled. Royal brother, listen to my explanation. I can explain. There's a reason for all this, a coincidence. Explain your ass. I'll listen to your F***king explanation. His Majesty cut him off right away, his roar echoing throughout the palace. Yun Xiaoyao. You disobedient, unfilial thing, you treacherous, deceiving thing, you. Suddenly, he roared, who allowed you to sit down? Stand up. You bastard, you old bastard. You've become king demon all these years. Yun Xiaoyao raised his head and argued, you can scold me, who asked you to be my blood brother? But you can't scold our father. You can't even call me a bastard or a bastard. Think about it yourself. I miss your father, my *SS. I miss your son, my *SS. His Majesty was infuriated and spoke without thinking. Shut up. You don't have the right to speak in front of me. But you really can't scold my father. Scolding my father is scolding your father. Why you're the ruler of the world, you're the only one in the world. You can't speak like this. Yun Xiaoyao's aura grew weaker and weaker. Finally, he squatted on the chair with his neck hunched. His Majesty was getting angrier and angrier. He had already stood up and walked over step by step, looking down at Yun Xiaoyao like a majestic lion. He pointed his finger at his forehead and scolded. Each time he scolded, he pointed his finger and Yun Xiaoyao would tilt his head back. With another scolding, he pointed his finger again and Yun Xiaoyao would tilt his head back. In the end, it was obvious that the finger pointing was not enough to satisfy His Majesty's tyrannical heart. He kicked King Xiaoyao twice, turning him into a rolling gourd on the ground. Your Majesty, please calm down, please calm down. Qiu Jianhan saw Yun Xiaoyao's helpless pleading gaze and came forward to mediate. However, once he spoke, old Marshal Qiu knew that he had fallen into a trap. Chapter 781. As expected, His Majesty's gaze shifted to Qiu Jianhan as soon as he was told to calm down. His rage grew. Oh ho 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 ho. I was wondering who was so bold that I couldn't even vent my anger in front of him. So, it's Qiu Jianhan who has been spouting nonsense, deceiving the emperor and bewitching the emperor as his duty. Old Marshal Qiu. Minister Qiu. Great war god Qiu. How are you? You're great. I have high hopes for you, remember to keep it up. Qiu Jianhan sat with his head down, exasperated. I remember asking you many times about Supreme Cloud's true identity. Didn't you say you didn't know as well? But you don't seem so surprised now. I say, why do you want to run away once I ask you to investigate? You actually want to go to the Western Troop to preside over the war, wanting to hide. I say, why do you want to hide? So, you're hiding from me, from this troublesome place, from this troublesome person. So, all of you know about this, but you're hiding it from me, am I right? Oh ho ho ho. Qiu Jianhan. The emperor bellowed, do you think I'm an idiot? Qiu Jianhan's cough was stuck in his throat, almost choking to death. I'm an idiot? What can I say? I can say, Your Majesty, you're not an idiot, or, Your Majesty, you're wise. That didn't seem right. The more I tried to explain, the worse things would get. So, I decided to shut up and obediently endure this storm. Then, His Majesty's wrath gradually shifted to Fang Qingtian and then to Leng Daoyin. By the time the emperor was tired of cursing and leaned back on his chair to pant and drink water, the four men's faces and hair were already covered in white spittle. It was the first time in so many years that His Majesty had been so enraged. How could he not be enraged? The emperor felt as if his internal organs had been blown apart 800 times over. Now, as long as he saw the four men's heads drooping and their cowardly faces, he felt like his heart was going to explode again. He wanted to lash out again and start cursing right here and now. However, his stomach was clearly still full of anger, but now he only felt dizzy. Shockingly, he didn't even have the strength to be angry. He could only pant heavily while glaring fiercely at these guys. His gaze was as sharp as a knife, stabbing at them. If gazes were really blades, then in this short period of time, the four of them would have been sliced 700 to 800 times. Cough, cough, cough. Fang Qingtian cleared his throat and was about to speak. Old fart, why are you coughing? You have tuberculosis? In the past, when you were like this, I had to give you a lot of face. I wouldn't say anything. But now. The emperor narrowed his eyes at Fang Qingtian. Who doesn't know how an old fellow like you, who has one foot in the coffin and half of your body in the underworld, can still come out to piss me off? So it's because Lord Supreme Cloud is here to extend your life. Ho ho ho, you're so honored. Fang Qingtian was dumbfounded. I coughed a few times to get down to business. How did I end up getting hit in the face with a hot fart? What else do you have to say? Say it, say it. His Majesty, who had lost control of his emotions, was exasperated. You bastards, what kind of person do you think I am? You're hiding something that all of you know from me? Do you think I'm a fatuous emperor who doesn't know what's right and wrong? You want to kill Supreme Cloud the moment you find him? Because he's so meritorious? Are you afraid of me? That's why you're hiding everything from me? What a bunch of bastards. Your Majesty, even if your Majesty is furious, now isn't the time to vent your anger. What's more urgent now is that the situation is so turbulent that it's obviously the doing of someone with ulterior motives. What we should be thinking about now is what we should do about this matter. How should we react? Fang Qingtian said seriously, this matter must be dealt with as soon as possible. If it's allowed to grow, it could easily shake the nation. Humph. The emperor snorted angrily and said, all of you, speak. How should we deal with this? One by one. Qiu Jianhan coughed. He wanted to speak, but when he raised his head, he shrank it back. He used his eyes to look at Yun Xiaoyao, hinting that he should be the one to speak about this matter. You are the victim's father, who else would be the one to take the blame if not you? Yun Xiaoyao rolled his eyes and shrunk into his chair without making a sound. Me? How dare I open my mouth now? Didn't you see that I gave you a good beating the moment I opened my mouth? Besides, I don't have any ideas. You want me to think of a solution for this kind of brainstorming matter? You think too highly of me. Lord Yun was feeling extremely aggrieved as well. I'm just an idle prince. That old bastard went out to play around and gave birth to me, but he didn't care. I was conferred the title of Marquis, but he didn't give me any real power. I don't even have a salary, but how many times have I risked my life for the Empire of Yutang all these years? It would be an understatement to say that I survived 100 battles. So what if my son is Supreme Cloud? He has saved the entire empire. Father and son, we have done so much for the Empire of Yutang. Not only do we not get anything in return, we even have to scold us like this. Until now, you fellows still want your father to face the lightning. What kind of logic was this? Even if you beat me to death, I won't come out. Once I come out, I might be beaten to death. You fellows still have some dignity in the eyes of this emperor, but I don't even have the slightest bit of dignity in front of him. If he wanted to hit me, he would hit me, and if he wanted to scold me, he would scold me. In fact, when he hit me, I had to use all my cultivation to resist him, afraid that I would hurt him. Apart from not being able to kill me, he could do whatever he wanted to me. Moreover, it was perfectly justified, and he called it family law, what the F***ck. Leng Daoyin was the least suspicious one. Firstly, he had less contact with Yun Yang, and secondly, he had not received any treatment from Yun Yang. He coughed and wiped the saliva off his face, saying, "Old Fang is right. Someone is obviously behind this, with ulterior motives. I reckon that it's most likely the people from the so-called School of Kismet State. Why don't we focus our detection efforts on them? Do I need you to tell me that? What you're saying is nonsense." The emperor rolled his eyes and said angrily, "The problem is, it's already been turned into a god-making movement. Don't you know that the law doesn't punish the masses?" Everyone was silent. What he said hit the nail on the head. This was the reality, a god-making movement. Using Supreme Cloud's influence to stir up a frenzy, the entire School of Kismet State would be pushed out. With this momentum, the world scholars would be mobilized to push the School of Kismet State to the altar. They were smart. There was only one person in the Empire of Yutong who could be made a god. Chapter 782. No matter how powerful and influential the School of Kismet State was, it was still a far cry from Supreme Cloud. The method that could be used on other emperors in history was completely inapplicable to the Empire of Yutong. Therefore, they could only borrow the momentum. Now that his identity had been exposed and his enemy was the top sect of the continent, the Four Seasons Tower, he would not be able to live for long. The School of Kismet State could even carry out a deeper level of operations from within the School of Kismet State. His identity had been exposed and his enemy was the continent's top sect, the Four Seasons Tower. As long as Supreme Cloud died, the benefits of this massive deification movement that affected the entire world would all belong to the School of Kismet State. Even the Yutong royalty would not be able to gain much from it. At most, they would only be able to get some scraps. Why would they not do something like this? The timing right now was a godsend opportunity. Yutong's momentum was already established. Now that the military generals were expanding their territories and establishing meritorious deeds, the civil officials and scholars would not be of much use at such a time. It was the achievement of unifying Tianxian. How regretful would it be if they could not get a share of it? Those with official positions would be better. But what about the scholars without official positions? Easy. I'll give you a reason. You just have to start preaching. As long as you preach well and properly, you'll naturally be credited. When the world is unified in the future, you'll all be the meritorious officials. This is because you've made a great contribution in the War of Unification. Furthermore, the School of Kismet State has the merit of educating the people of the world. The momentum has already been established, and it is almost unshakable. It had to be said that this kind of fallacious reasoning and devious tricks that schemed against the hearts of many scholars were impressively very popular. Yes, I'm writing a biography for Supreme Cloud and the School of Kismet State today. As long as the country is unified in the future, my reputation will naturally spread. At that time, no matter where he went, he would have a solid set of qualifications that could not be faked. There was no need to fight or work. All I had to do was move my lips and pen. There was no danger at all. All I had to do was write a biography and flatter someone. What an easy job. It was much easier than those fools who went to the battlefield with their heads in their hands, was it not? Besides, when I became an official in the future, I would be much better than those crude people who only knew how to swear and kill people. This was clearly a good thing with no capital but great profits. Facing such a good thing, wouldn't these scholars flock to it like ducks? What? You're saying what we're doing is wrong? Let me ask you, is Supreme Cloud our nation's hero? What's wrong with me writing a biography for him? Committed a crime? Shouldn't I do something for Lord Supreme Cloud? What do you mean by that? You want to rebel? That's right, those who opposed it were really a big hat that could be casually pinned on them, and they would be consigned to eternal damnation. It had to be said that the School of Kismet State's move was indeed a masterful move. He had captured the mentality of Yutong's people. You are loyal, you are grateful, I will use your gratitude and your loyalty. You are despicable, you are opportunistic, I will use your despicable and opportunistic. The bright spots and deep-rooted bad habits of human nature were all accounted for. This wave is coming at us ferociously and the repercussions are endless. It's not easy to deal with. Qiu Jianhan sighed. Everything else is still manageable, but the key is that they've tied themselves to Supreme Cloud and even the 9 Supremes' names. As the saying goes, pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Even if we can take any measures, the effect will be minimal under this premise. There's almost no good countermeasure. Hearing Qiu Jianhan's words, His Majesty was even more annoyed. How could he not know this? He also knew the crux of the matter and the severity of it. He hoped that Qiu Jianhan and the others could come up with a solution. Whoever wanted to hear the root of the matter was no longer important. His gaze darted back and forth across the faces of the 4 big shots like flying daggers. Finally, he sighed and said, usually, there's a limit to the destructiveness of public opinion. As long as the officials step in, it's not difficult to quell the discussion as soon as possible. However, this time, there's someone manipulating it, and the impact is too wide. It's a fact that the law doesn't punish the masses, and this masses still have a chance to do something great. The human heart has always been easily swayed. It's difficult to have a long-term view of the big picture and sense of crisis. Yun Xiaoyao and the others frowned and nodded in agreement to this point. The ripple caused by this incident was undoubtedly serious. The aftermath was even more significant, but as His Majesty had said, as long as the mastermind behind the scenes could be dealt with, it would be easy to deal with. The problem then shifted to the School of Kismet State. The School of Kismet State did not have many headmasters, but how many people could there be in a school that was secluded from the world? In spite of this, since it was a secluded school, the abilities of its members were by no means mediocre. The depth of their cultivation base was foreseeable. If they were to completely oppose each other, it was foreseeable that they would bring great harm to the empire of Yutong's higher-ups with their formidable martial prowess. What was more, Yutong would not have the ability to stop them at all. Fang Qingtian rubbed his brows. This incident has come too abruptly. We're already unusually passive and unprepared. I wonder what the real purpose of the School of Kismet State's sudden appearance is. Sigh. The thoughts of these people from the hidden sects are unreasonable to begin with. They've been well behaved for so many years in the past. Why would they suddenly appear at this critical juncture? Yun Xiaoyao could not understand this. Actually, the School of Kismet State has come to me before, the Emperor chuckled humorlessly. Speaking of this, perhaps it's really fate's arrangement. Actually, the School of Kismet State's people didn't want to do this, to go to such extremes, but reality forced them to do so. Putting aside their standpoint, I can even understand their choice and their way of doing things. They don't feel too good about it. They might not be any more relaxed than our helplessness. What do you mean? Yun Xiaoyao asked in surprise. The emperor shut his mouth right away and glared at Yun Xiaoyao, not saying another word. Everyone felt a slight chill run down their spines. His Majesty had already opened his mouth and was about to reveal everything he knew, but Yun Xiaoyao's question, which was clearly just a formality to connect the dots, had stopped in a fit of pique. I can say it to others, but I won't say it if you ask. There was a moment of awkward silence. After a long silence, Yun Xiaoyao looked at the emperor in a daze and said carefully, "Royal brother? You." The emperor bared his teeth and said as if he was about to devour someone, Your son is so amazing, a living legend. You can go ask your son, why do you need to ask me? Wasn't it already done? Why was it back? Yin Xiaoyao was even more bewildered, standing there for a long, long time. Ha 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 ha. Qiu Jianhan and the others could no longer hold it in. Even when they were discussing such a serious topic and in front of the emperor, they could not help bursting into laughter. It had to be said that the atmosphere between the two brothers of the royal family was really amusing. Especially for the emperor, who was so talented and bold that he could swallow the world, to be so aggressive, it made people's eyes light up. No, it was a rare sight to see. What do you mean, Your Majesty? Qiu Jianhan asked hurriedly as he trembled with laughter, trying his best to control himself. After venting his anger, the emperor said in a low voice, the school of Kismet State's original intention was to support Dongxian. Including Dongxuan's invasion of the Fortress of Resilience, it was part of their plan. Oh. Everyone present was smart enough to understand the situation at once. However, they didn't expect that Dongxian could still be defeated in the end, despite having such a huge advantage. A mocking smile hung on His Majesty's face as he said, so, they can only change their target now. The group understood it all at once. Going against their original intention, and abandoning their stance. If I were from the school of Kismet State, I would be embarrassed as well. The school of Kismet State has always locked onto its target from the inside out and hit it with a single strike. There has never been an exception since the beginning of time. This has also established the positivity of their identity in the annals of history. This time, however, due to the change in the situation, they could only choose to go from the outside and passively, using public opinion to force us to acknowledge their position. Only then could they continue to benefit. Of course, another reason is that we don't acknowledge their position. His Majesty said, that's why there's this commotion. It's just that the timing they've chosen to start the commotion is too perfect. It's perfect, absolutely perfect. Fang Qingtian said, that's right. If they'd started it earlier, we could have just ignored it and the rumors would have dissipated. If they'd started it later, the continent's situation would have been settled. Whether Supreme Cloud's identity and background would have been exposed, and the school of Kismet State's choice would have been irrelevant. It just so happened that Yutong had just risen and started the final battle to pacify Tianxian. Even though the conquest of Zhou has become a foregone conclusion, it has yet to be completed. The timing is impeccable. Let's stop flattering those shameless fellows. How should we deal with them next? This is the real headache. Let's think of a solution quickly. Yin Xiaoyao exhaled deeply and said, from what I see, the most despicable ones now are the scholars who take advantage of the situation and add fuel to the fire. Scholars are not good people. Most righteous people are like dogs, but most heartless people are scholars. These words are the best. Fang Qingtian's attitude was more fair as he said, I'm afraid King Yun's words are a little biased. There are still many scholars in Yutong who have a strong moral character. There are many civil officials in the imperial court who serve the public, the nation, and the people wholeheartedly. Those who are stirring up trouble and adding fuel to the fire are just scum. These people want to use this opportunity to gain fame and embark on an official career. They even hope to leave their names in the annals of history. What filthy thoughts they have, Leng Daoyin said, it's also the best time for them to take advantage of this. If this is something that the school of Kismet State has long planned, or even something that they've planned and grasped perfectly, then the school of Kismet State's scheme is truly remarkable. I'm afraid that we martial artists really can't give any better suggestions on this matter. Qiu Jianhan said, Your Majesty, why don't you summon the Chancellor, the Grand Tutor, and the others and see what they have to say? Fang Qingtian and Leng Daoyin chuckled. This old man was still as cunning as ever. Using scholars to deal with scholars, let's write one chapter today. Depressing, the plot design is wrong. I'm having a headache. I've planned to have a decisive battle here. This has been decided a long time ago. Therefore, I've let Sun Luo's men leave and exposed Supreme Cloud's identity. However, after thinking about it for 2 days, the more I think about it, the more I feel that it's not right. If I were to have a decisive battle here, some of the holes that I've dug previously would be left unfilled and a part of the plot would be broken. However, since I've already written it and sent it out, it's rather awkward. In other words, these few chapters should only appear about 15 chapters later. Now that I've typed them out so quickly, it's like a child has been born before the due date, and much earlier, too. I'm also troubled. Chapter 783. The Grand Tutor and the others are already waiting in the side hall. The Emperor snorted. Summoning the few of you is only to stabilize the military's morale. Such sentiments can be spread among the commoners, but they must never be spread among the military. All of you should understand this. The group rolled their eyes. Of course we understand. It's just that you've come to see us first. I'm afraid it's not because your reason is so honorable. I'm afraid the secretive reason is, you want to vent your anger first to vent your frustrations, don't you? However, from this point of view, the fact that His Majesty wanted to vent his anger before discussing how to deal with this matter, did it not seem to be a big deal? Hurry up and let Supreme Cloud return in secret. His Majesty stood up, his eyes looking at the sky and the ground, but not at Yun Xiaoyao, as if he was talking to the air. The Western Front has been set in stone. He has no more use there. Instead, the mess in the capital city is of utmost importance. We need a living legend like him to hold the fort. Yes. Yun Xiaoyao answered from behind. He was the only one who could agree to this. No one else could. His Majesty snorted again and left with a flick of his sleeves. It had to be said that the civil officials really had countless ways to deal with this kind of scheming and deceitful business. At least, His Majesty felt much better when he heard it. This was probably the best explanation of specialization in every field. Your Majesty, we can't act rashly in the current situation. We can try to divide them and split them up in response. How do we divide them and attack them one by one? The school of Kismet states plotting is deep. Now that the situation is set, not only will it be difficult to break it forcefully, but it will also throw us into further disarray. It will be futile. Why don't we pick a few who are currently leading the wave of praise? The higher the reputation, the better. Perhaps we can reward them with official positions. This is what they mean by dividing them. Scholars have always despised each other since ancient times. They don't worry about poverty, but they worry about inequality. Naturally, there will be conflicts among them. These few with vested interests will definitely persuade others to protect their own interests. At the very least, they won't lose what they already have. After all, this is their fundamental purpose. This is the first reason. That makes sense. What's the second reason? The second is to target and suppress a portion of the people on this basis, especially those who are particularly happy. Suppress them mercilessly, without turning back, and bring disaster to their families and 9 generations. If we don't do this, we won't be able to make them betray their loved ones and completely calm them down. Then, we can use this as a negative example to warn others, and let those who have already accepted the favor of the imperial court feel lucky. Such a contradiction would naturally intensify and become even more difficult to mediate. That makes sense. Thirdly, let those who have already pledged their allegiance be in charge of the follow-up of this matter. How could the imperial court's official position and rewards be given for free? Letting them settle this matter was exactly what they should do, and it was appropriate. I believe that since they have already chosen to betray their original position, they will only be even more ruthless and unscrupulous towards their original position. They will be unscrupulous and resort to every conceivable means. His Majesty's heart skipped a beat. He gave a faint "oh" and said, The deeper the love, the more hatred. The more kindness, the more resentment. Other than that, deal with those who are in the middle of the uproar as much as possible. There's no need to reward them with great rewards or official positions. We only need to dissuade some of the wavering ones. If necessary, We can come up with another plan to take drastic measures and spread rumors among the people at the bottom. Label such behavior as rebellion. That way, it's inevitable that the uproar on the other side will be divided. There will be advances and retreats in the middle. The crime at the bottom will be too heavy, and the uproar will be greatly reduced. After that, it'll be time for the officials to officially intervene. They'll directly arrest some of the targets with the crime of harming the nation's hero. I think it'll be impossible to lock onto those conspiratorial pawns by then. Even if mistakes are inevitable, they only have themselves to blame. That's right, that's right. Lord Supreme Cloud is the nation's hero. For these people to jump out and expose Supreme Cloud's identity is equivalent to placing the hero under the blade of the enemy. This is treason. This is treason. Their intentions are deserving of death. And then, the civil officials spoke freely. It did not take long for 100 feasible plans to come out. It could be said that if not for the School of Kismet State's instigation behind the scenes, this series of tactics might have vanished into thin air overnight. Even with the School of Kismet State's intervention and instigation and support, the series of punches was enough to make them dizzy and unable to attend to their ends. As His Majesty listened to the officials' discussion, he nodded, but a strange feeling rose in his heart. These tactics were directed at the human heart and nature. They were cunning, vicious, and unscrupulous, but they were the most effective and immediate. If we're talking about the art of killing without spilling blood, these scholars are the ones who have truly reached the pinnacle of perfection. The emperor sat on the throne, narrowing his eyes as he thought to himself. As an emperor, it's not easy to control the hearts of people. Martial men are forthright and straightforward. As long as you master the method and gain their loyalty, you can control them. Scholars, on the other hand. When these thoughts come out of the mouths of the great, bright, and righteous officials, it's so endless. If the martial men harbor rebellious thoughts, perhaps an army can subdue them. But what if the scholars harbor rebellious thoughts? It's been 3 years. His Majesty was cautious. Glancing at the civil officials from the corner of his eyes, he sighed deeply in his heart. All of you are wise and far-sighted, scheming and meticulous. It's a pity that no one has mentioned the most important part after all this planning. Supreme Cloud's identity has been exposed. How can you guarantee the safety of Supreme Cloud and his family? Such a riot can be quelled with a wave of a hand, even if it's only for a moment. However, if Supreme Cloud dies because of this, do you think there'll be a second residence of 9 Supremes in this world? That's the foundation of a nation. If it's just to find firefighters, why would I need to provide you with high positions and generous salaries? It looks like the direction of selecting talents to govern the nation needs to be adjusted. His Majesty's gaze was deep, countless thoughts running through his mind at this very moment. Yun Yang hurried to the western battlefront and witnessed Yutong's army's successive victories with his own eyes. He was immediately relieved and gave up on the idea of showing himself. It was true that if he were to show himself here and even assist them with his manifestation powers, the western battlefront's morale would be even higher, but was this really a good idea? His departure was already a foregone conclusion. Yutong had to gradually get used to not having the 9 Supremes' help to turn the tide of the war. This was not a need, it was a necessity. Ling Xiaozui and Dugu Chou had nothing better to do, so they followed him to watch the battlefield. Chapter 784. How can I be of any help in such a situation? Ling Xiaozui shook his head. This is a one-sided massacre. The empire of Zio's generals have lost their will to fight, their soldiers have lost their will to fight. They are a dragon without a leader and are in utter chaos. Without a fight, they can destroy their own country, Yun Yang said with a relaxed smile. Since we're already here, why don't we take a look at the situation? The 3 of them circled the empire of Zio a few times and realized, with relief and helplessness, that there was indeed no need for them to intervene. Yutong's army is the best in the world. Dugu Chou exclaimed in admiration. This was not a boast, it was old man Dugu's heartfelt words. Yutong's warriors on the battlefield were ferocious, their morale soaring. They did not retreat even when they were outnumbered, they advanced bravely and were unstoppable when they were outnumbered. This is like a bunch of men who've taken aphrodisiac, ravaging each other without fear. Ling Xiaozui was too embarrassed to continue halfway through his sentence. The three of them were relieved. They had come with the intention of providing support on the battlefield, but it had turned into a leisurely trip. The contrast was unbearable. It was only on the fourth day, all the soldiers on the battlefield began to whisper to each other. Has anyone seen Lord Supreme Cloud? Has Lord Supreme Cloud appeared on the battlefield? Has Lord Supreme Cloud shown himself? No. I heard that something has happened in the capital city. Lord Supreme Cloud is required to rush back. I've heard about it too. I really don't know what happened. I wonder if it's serious, something that requires Lord Supreme Cloud to deal with. I'm afraid it's not a small matter. Yes, Yun Yang's expression changed at once upon hearing it. He immediately realized that something major must have happened in Tiantang City. Otherwise, Wang Yunzhu would not have dared to spread the news to him in such a manner, no matter how bold he was. He quickly took out the Nine Heavens dictum to check, only to realize that it was filled with messages from Shui Wuyin. Boss, something terrible has happened. Your identity has been exposed. This is the doing of the school of Kismet State. Their current movements are, the capital city is now. There are two extremely powerful forces that are trying their best to track down the Nine Heavens dictum. Boss, are you there? Please reply me quickly. Right now, the Nine Heavens dictum is completely dormant and hasn't moved at all. We're waiting for your instructions. Boss, Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath. His expression was already dark, his eyes gleaming with a murderous intent. The school of Kismet State. I didn't put in the effort to look for you. You should have been lucky, but now you actually took the initiative to come to me. Alright, then let's settle old and new debts together. Looking at his darkened expression, Ling Xiaozui asked, what happened? Yin Yang smiled faintly and said, it's nothing. It's just that my hidden identity has been exposed. Ling Xiaozui was stunned and blurted out, Supreme Cloud? Yin Yang shrugged. See, it's nothing. Haven't all of you guessed it already? Ling Xiaozui was speechless. How is this nothing? We guessed it because you've never hidden your peculiarities from us, but to the outside world, your identity has always been the biggest secret in the world. Gu Chaoyang had been nagging about it previously. It was because of this that he could survive under Mr. Nian's hand and escape by sheer luck. Stay put. Yin Yang sent a message to Shui Wuyin. He then stood up. We have to go back. Knowing this, the Four Seasons Tower will definitely make a big move. I think, this should be the final battle with the Four Seasons Tower. The final battle. Ling Xiaozui and Du Gachao's eyes shone. Since we're destined to leave, our grudges should be settled. Yin Yang smiled, his eyes gleaming with boundless murderous intent as he said word by word, the Four Seasons Tower should only be left with a few dozens of people now. Ling Xiaozui and Du Gachou calculated in their hearts and were suddenly struck with terror. Ever since Supreme Cloud's return to exact his revenge, the Four Seasons Tower had suffered continuous losses. The periphery was almost completely massacred. Supreme Lord Springfrost's men were first uprooted, then, step by step, to the 5 venerable lords, to the civil and martial ministers. There was also the rumored will of Mr. Nian's doppelganger that was killed some time ago. How many of the Four Seasons Tower's men were left? The Four Seasons Tower's unfathomable depth was never just a rumor. Yang Yun, Xia, Qiu, and Dong's men should still be around, right? Du Gachou reminded him. While Xia, Qiu, and Dong's men are still around, they're no longer a threat now. Yin Yang smiled. I've already gotten hold of the name list of these people, their identities, backgrounds, and backgrounds. Killing them is as easy as killing chickens. The corners of Ling Xiaozui's lips twitched. Getting hold of the name list. To Yin Yang, these people were like being sentenced to death. There was no chance of escape. With Yun Yang's current cultivation base and capability, he could kill any strong person in this world. The crux of his problem was whether he could know, confirm, and find them. That was all. As long as he knew, he would die without a doubt. A gust of wind blew through the night. Despite being thousands of miles away, Yun Yang, whose cultivation base had skyrocketed, had rushed back to Tiantang City at top speed. Looking down from the sky at Tiantang City that had more than a dozen times more people than before, especially at the residence of Yun that was so crowded that even a mouse could not move, Yun Yang's eyes glinted with an unusual cold glint. There were dozens of extremely powerful auras in Tiantang City right now. Every single aura was extraordinarily tyrannical, strong to the point it caused one's hair to stand on end and shiver in fear. It was like there were countless venomous snakes lurking in the shadows, ready to devour anyone at any time. These people are waiting for me to go back and die. Yin Yang chuckled coldly. He was really not worried about these auras. He had never been concerned about the ambush and siege that came openly. What Yin Yang was truly worried about were the hidden enemies who would not even reveal their auras. These people were the ones who could pose a real threat to him. The unknown was the scariest. It was because the unknown was mysterious, because the unknown was unpredictable. Yin Yang was the same. When Supreme Cloud's origin was a mystery, it was difficult for the Four Seasons Tower to eliminate him even when his ability was not very high. Now that his identity had been exposed, the Four Seasons Tower had still chosen the most extreme and direct solution despite Yun Yang having the entire empire of Yutong as his backing. In the eyes of those with ulterior motives, the entire capital city was now filled with the aura of danger. To Yun Yang, Tiantang City was no longer his homeland now, but a trap that had ensnared him. There were lethal traps everywhere. Everyone Yun Yang knew had a few people following and observing them in the dark, trying their best to reduce their presence. From the emperor to Qiu Jianhan, Ling Daoyin, Wu Lai. Old Mistress Shangguan Lingxiu, Ji Lingxi. Fang Mafei, Bai Shue, Xiao Xiaoqing. Yin Xiaoyao, wait a minute. Chapter 785. The School of Kismet State lives up to its 10,000 years of heritage indeed. Their ability to manipulate people's hearts is truly remarkable. All the weaknesses of human nature are in these two short sentences. Yin Yang could not help sighing as he looked at the bustling crowd below him, the citizens who had been encouraged to come and worship the Nine Supremes. Such worship and reverence were supposed to be a great thing for the country, but now that it was being used by the School of Kismet State, it had become an extremely bad thing. Yet, these people were acting in the name of righteousness, preventing the country's machinery from intervening directly. Dealing with these people? Intervening? Not allowing people to come and worship the Nine Supremes? What would that be? If they did so, they would immediately be labeled as being ungrateful. It would be putting away the bow when it had served its purpose, it would be overpowering its master, that would really cause endless turbulence in the future. It might even cause a civil revolt. Yin Yang searched around and soon found news of Bauer. He was in the palace, accompanied by a young girl who looked like she was carved out of jade, carrying a snow-white kitten in her arms, that seemed to be Big Whitey. Brother Bauer, can you teach me how to practice and write? The little girl stared at Bauer with her big, adorable eyes, her gaze filled with admiration. This little brother is amazing. He's only a few years older than me, but he can write, he can read, he can reason, and he even knows martial arts. Wow! This formation is amazing. I admire him so much. Yin Yang was shocked to see her. Was this Deputy General Wang Zhuang's youngest daughter, Darling? The little girl was about 5 or 6 years old, looking even cuter than when he first saw her. What's so great about me? My uncle is the best. Bauer said, I learned what I know from my uncle. Your uncle is so awesome. Darling said admiringly, do I know your uncle? Of course you know my uncle. Bauer snorted. It's Lord Supreme Cloud. Nanan's eyes almost bloomed. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and cried out excitedly, "Ah! Your uncle is Lord Supreme Cloud. I like him the most, worship him the most, the most, the most." However, after thinking for a long time, he couldn't think of any words. In spite of this, Yun Yang was rendered speechless for a long time. How did I become an old man?" Bauer said proudly, "Of course, my uncle is the most powerful person in the world." Some distance away, Yun Xiaoyao and His Majesty stood quietly at the side, watching the two children play with smiles on their faces. After the smile, both of their faces were equally heavy. His face was ashen. He was just forcing himself to smile. "I've given this little girl a name." Yun Xiaoyao forced a smile and said, "Brother, do you want to hear it?" The emperor smiled and did not answer the question. "This is Wang Zhuang's daughter." Wang Zhuang followed the 9 supremes into battle and died at Tianxian Cliff. "I don't think it's too much to name his daughter." Yun Xiaoyao replied, "Her surname is Wang." "How about Wang Yi?" The emperor turned to look at Yun Xiaoyao and smiled. "Mother of the world?" Yun Xiaoyao laughed heartily, his expression non-committal. The emperor pondered for a moment and said, "For now, let's talk about Feng Yi. We'll see after a few years. After all, to use Mother of the World, the first thing to do is Feng Yi. Brother, you're the one who has thought this through." "Of course, it should be so." Have you contacted Supreme Cloud?" the emperor asked. "He probably already knows," Yun Xiaoyao said. "He should be on his way back now." His Majesty paced 2 steps and said in a low voice, "Back? What for?" "He can't come back, he shouldn't." Yun Xiaoyao said, "This younger brother thinks so too. If he comes back, I'm afraid he'll die." "I can't take this risk," the emperor said. During the last meeting, Supreme Cloud was asked to return earlier, but this time, things had changed completely. Yun Xiaoyao said, "Brother, have you forgotten what the group of civil officials said? To quell the chaos before us, Supreme Cloud only needs to return and say a word. Everything will be settled and the situation will be set in stone." The emperor enunciated each word in a low voice. "I'd rather keep the chaos going than let him come back and fall into this trap." Yun Xiaoyao choked and said hoarsely, "I think so too. It's not appropriate for Supreme Cloud to show himself now, no matter what." The emperor placed his hands behind his back and said faintly, "However, as long as he doesn't show himself for a period of time, I'm afraid someone will come after you and me. It could be the Shangguan girl, or the Ji girl. No matter how I think about it, only these few people need to be watched closely. As for the others, they shouldn't be considered in the other party's plan." The emperor looked at Yun Xiaoyao. "Do you understand what I mean?" Yun Xiaoyao nodded. "This younger brother understands. We brothers seem to have noble identities, 1 emperor and 1 king, that could easily shake the nation's foundation. However, the reality is that we're gone. While it will cause unrest to this country, it may not be fatal because we already have a successor and Supreme Cloud to intimidate the world. But if Supreme Cloud is gone, it's all over." The emperor said, "I'd rather die than betray Yutong." "Brother. This younger brother understands. Yutong can take a step back for now. Any of Yutong's officials can be sacrificed, even you and I can die. But no matter what, nothing must happen to Supreme Cloud." His Majesty said grimly. Once his words trailed off, he sighed. His eyes were filled with determination. To be able to say such words, it was natural that he felt a lot of emotions. It was because the situation in the capital had changed drastically in the past few days. It was too much for one's eyes to take in. According to the civil officials' plan, it was indeed a piece of cake to deal with the scholars who were stirring up trouble outside. As long as they were meritorious, they could settle the matter. However, the entire plan had only just begun when it was suddenly met with the most extreme counterattack. This kind of thing actually happened during the court session. A civil official had just started to report to the court and had just begun, 89 scholars who wrote books and spread propaganda for the school of Kismet State have been apprehended. It was at this moment that a voice suddenly rang out in the Orem Hall. The voice was cold, but it carried an indescribable air of grandeur. Your Majesty, Emperor of Yutong, why are you targeting the school of Kismet State specifically? The voice was like a bell, reverberating in the hall. All of a sudden, the expressions of everyone in the imperial court changed. This was Yutong's highest authority. This was the pinnacle of Yutong. There were so many experts and so many officials here, but they had no idea where the enemy was. The other party could actually sneak into the hall without a sound at such a time. What kind of trick was this? Being able to enter this place without a sound, did that mean that he could kill everyone here without a sound? The civil and military officials were in a frenzy. Everyone looked around, but they could not find the person. Yun Xiaoyao's eyes opened abruptly. He mobilized his deific consciousness with all his might and gathered his lifetime's cultivation base in an attempt to find the hidden person, but it was to no avail as well. He could not help but be shocked. Chapter 786. Yun Xiaoyao was already Yutong's publicly acknowledged unrivaled expert, the person with the highest cultivation base in the Orem Hall. If even he was at his wit's end, the others' efforts would only be futile. For a moment, they were overwhelmed with helplessness. The calmest person was the Emperor of Yutong himself. He sat on the throne without moving, even maintaining a relaxed state as he said faintly, "Someone from the school of Kismet State? Your Majesty has been kind enough to remember the name of a small, rural sect of the martial world. This lowly one is exceptionally honored." The voice said faintly, "I beg your Majesty to retract your order and spare the school of Kismet State." Everyone knew that this was not a plea but a threat, a blatant threat. The other party had infiltrated without a sound and spoken in such a brazen manner. It was obvious that he was using reality to prove one thing: the school of Kismet State could do anything they wanted. Even if they wanted to kill you and all your civil and military officials, it would be as easy as flipping a hand. No one could stop them. The Emperor said faintly, "This matter concerns the nation's foundation. It must be considered carefully." His gaze swept over Yun Xiaoyao briefly. His only hope now was that Yun Xiaoyao could find this person and kill him. If he could not, he could only be threatened, compromised, and forced to submit. The situation was clear now. The lives of the civil and military officials of the imperial court were in the other party's hands. Since the other party had come here and behaved so brazenly, it was obvious that this was an ultimatum. The slightest disagreement would result in a massacre, and even the emperor himself would not be able to bear the consequences of such an extreme action. Yun Xiaoyao paled bit by bit. He had exhausted all his means, but he still could not locate the other party's location. The other party was like a gust of wind. Although he knew that he was hovering above the hall, he could not lock onto him. It was obvious that this person's cultivation base was far above his own. Not only could he not locate the other party, even if he was lucky enough to come into contact with him, he would have to return empty-handed. The other party obviously knew what His Majesty was plotting. After waiting for a while, he said faintly, "King Yun is known as Yutong's unrivaled expert. Your skills are indeed unparalleled. It's a pity that people like us from the mountains still have a few tricks up our sleeves to preserve our lives. I'm afraid King Yun will have to waste his efforts to find us, won't it?" His Majesty's heart suddenly went cold. He said in a low voice, "What do you want?" The moment he said this, all the civil and military officials in the hall felt a strong sense of humiliation wash over them. They were in the hall of the highest level of the country, yet they were being threatened in such a straightforward manner. The voice said, "We only wish to cooperate closely with His Majesty the Emperor. That's all." The Emperor took a deep breath and said, "I need time to discuss with the officials. I believe His Majesty will not make us wait for too long, right?" The voice said indifferently. The Emperor closed his eyes and said in a flat voice, "Not bad. If that's the case, this commoner will come again tomorrow to listen to Your Majesty's teachings." The voice smiled faintly and then went silent. There was silence in the hall for a long time. Everyone's faces were ashen, and their eyes were filled with anger. That indescribable humiliation filled everyone's heart. The generals were all clenching their fists in anger. The civil officials' faces were purple, filled with righteous indignation. His Majesty was silent for a moment before he said, "Today's incident has made me completely understand one thing." No one spoke. Only the Emperor's voice reverberated in the hall, "I understand now. This world is a world where martial arts are respected. In this world, martial arts is higher than imperial power. It is not something that can be ignored just because we do not value it. I only hate that I don't have invincible martial arts in this world. It's better to have fists than power." His Majesty said tiredly, "I am tired. Let's end the court." He said that he needed to discuss with the officials, but he didn't have the authority to discuss it. Therefore, all the officials were speechless. If there was to be a discussion, it could have been done since everyone was here just now. The reason why it was pushed back for a day was to reclaim the last bit of dignity, the last bit of face, to keep a thin veneer. The school of Kismet State understood this, so they did not push it too far. Therefore, he left immediately. He would never have thought that this one day's grace would cause such a serious consequence. Even if it was only 2 hours, the school of Kismet State would still not be officially recognized by Yutong within these 2 hours. At that moment, His Majesty and Yun Xiaoyao waited quietly in the palace. In another 4 hours, the school of Kismet State's men would arrive. Both of them understood that Supreme Cloud must not be allowed to return at this time. It was not a big deal to be temporarily threatened now. While it would be a taboo to go back on one's words and reputation, there was no room for discussion at certain times and in certain positions. On the contrary, once Supreme Cloud returned and confronted these people, the consequences would be unimaginable. If Supreme Cloud were to be killed, it would be the end of everything. As long as Supreme Cloud was still alive, there would be room for his ability to improve. One day, he would be able to finish off the school of Kismet State, just like how he dealt with the Four Seasons Tower. This was the hope that Yutong could pin on. Therefore, His Majesty the Emperor was prepared to endure the humiliation for the greater good. A moment of forbearance would ensure his survival for 100 years. They'll be here soon. They can come at any time. Perhaps, they're already waiting in the Orem Hall. Yes. I can't believe that you and I have to face something like this on the eve of the world's unification. It's hilarious indeed. I'm probably the first, perhaps the only, emperor who has the hope of unifying the entire continent. This younger brother has nothing to say. Yun Xiaoyao was so ashamed that he almost died at once. He could not help but feel ashamed. Compared to others, he, the publicly acknowledged unrivaled expert of Yutong, needed to be ashamed and responsible. It's all right, it's all right. However, from now on, I'm going to revise the nation's basic policy, His Majesty said softly with his eyes half closed. Yun Xiaoyao was rather puzzled by the Emperor of Yutong's words. It was at this moment that they saw a person coming from the corner with quick steps. Both of them were stunned. Qiu Jianhan. The person who had come was Qiu Jianhan. Both the Emperor and Yun Xiaoyao wore expressions of surprise on their faces. How could both of them forget Qiu Jianhan's expression when he left the court yesterday, his gaze like lightning? He was so furious that he was trembling all over, barely able to walk out of the hall. Unable to hold it in any longer, he fell to the ground, spitting blood. As a veteran general who had been through hundreds of battles, it was needless to say that he was as determined as fire with age. Today, however, he had to endure such humiliation together with the emperor he had served in the Orit Hall of his own country. This was intolerable to Qiu Jianhan. However, he could only endure it no matter how much he could not. Once he acted recklessly, the price he would have to pay would be the demise of Yutong's entire imperial court. It would be the same as announcing the demise of Yutong. Qiu Jianhan suppressed his rage, holding it in until his heart was about to explode. Finally reaching his limit, he fell to the ground, spitting blood just as he stepped out of the hall. If he had not received Yun Yang's endless divine art to recuperate his body previously, this indignation would have suffocated the old marshal to death. He still could not take it now. After being sent back to his residence by the emperor's men, he was bedridden immediately, but he was still mumbling to himself, "The emperor is humiliated, the official must die. The official only hates the fact that I've neglected my martial skills all these years. I hate it, I hate it." Both of them did not expect Xiao Jianhan, who was supposed to be severely injured and barely able to get up, to appear here now. "Elder Qiu, why have you come?" Yun Xiaoyao was the first to ask. Xiao Jianhan's expression was dark as he said, "This official has something important to discuss with His Majesty." Hearing this, the emperor was startled, as was Yun Xiaoyao. Then, his eyes shone as he replied, "Since it's an important matter, it should be dealt with immediately. Let us go to the royal study to talk." Before his words echoed in the air, he had already pulled the emperor and left swiftly. Strictly speaking, this action was immensely rude. No matter how close Yun Xiaoyao and the emperor of Yutong were, even if they were brothers, there was still a difference between a ruler and his official. Yun Xiaoyao should not have made any decisions, let alone pulled the emperor away. The emperor's thoughts raced, a glint of contemplation flashing across his eyes. Then, his gaze brightened as well. He did not resist and left with the flow. In the royal study, Qiu Jianhan, who stood in front of both of them, was suddenly shrouded in mist. When the mist dissipated, his appearance had changed. His brows were sharp, his eyes bright, his robe fluttering in the wind. The person before him was none other than Yun Yang. Chapter 787. Now, he had turned into Qiu Jianhan's appearance with the help of his cloud manifestation and had come here in secret. His Majesty stood up abruptly and asked anxiously, "Why are you back? Didn't I tell you not to come back?" His voice was unusually anxious and inexplicable. There was also a tinge of exasperation. Yin Yang smiled easily. It's all right. No one knows that I'm back." While the emperor heaved a sigh of relief, another wave of pressure weighed down on him. Yin Yang had returned to Tiantang City and the Empire of Yutong. This outcome was both good and bad at the same time. If someone with ulterior motives found out, the consequences would take a drastic turn for the worse. It would be unimaginable. "What's the situation now?" asked Yun Yang. "Sigh," the emperor sighed dejectedly. "No matter what, as long as Supreme Cloud is still here and the Empire's faith remains strong, it's a good thing." "Yin Yang, don't be impulsive and act recklessly." Yin Yang nodded and said, "I won't be impulsive, I won't act recklessly." "Tell me directly." "The situation is like this. Yesterday's morning assembly." Yin Xiaoyao recounted what had happened yesterday, his face turning ashen as he spoke. After that, the plan to attack the school of Kismet State was temporarily put on hold. Yun Yang fell into silence after hearing the emperor's words. He did not speak for a long time, like a silent volcano that was about to erupt. The school of Kismet State. Heh. Yin Yang finally spoke, his voice cold and emotionless. "They said that they're here today to ask for an answer, right? That's what they said, isn't it?" His Majesty turned around in shock. "Supreme Cloud. Do you know what you're representing now? If you're impulsive, Yutong will be finished. Since you have the ability to sneak into the palace without everyone's knowledge, you can leave safely as well. Bear with this for now." Yin Yang said seriously, "I won't be impulsive, but I don't have to bear with it all the time either." He sucked in a deep breath and said, "We can do this and that." As he spoke, the emperor and Yun Xiaoyao's eyes lit up, growing brighter and brighter. At the same time, the vague thought in His Majesty's mind became clearer and clearer. When Yin Yang was done with his calculations, His Majesty heaved a long sigh, feeling like the boulder in his heart had been completely released. He smiled in relief and said, "Yin Yang, I was thinking of conferring an official position on you. It looks like there's no need for that now. Yin Yang could not help chuckling. Fortunately, you didn't reward me. I've never been suited to be an official. Yes, your current status is even higher than mine. His Majesty laughed heartily. Remember the first time I saw you, I only felt that you were a little slippery. The second time I saw you, I was sure that you were a little foppish. The third time I saw you, I felt that you were a little shrewd. The fourth time I saw you, I was suspicious because of your magical detoxification skill. However, the fifth time I saw you, all my suspicions were dispelled by your father. Until now, after so many twists and turns, it turns out that my initial guess was right. Yin Yang said respectfully, Your Majesty is wise. Yin Yang is impressed. Wise my foot. I'm so wise that I've been fooled by these fellows like a fool. If it was anyone else who said this, I would at most feel that they didn't mean what they said, but coming from your mouth, I only feel ashamed, so ashamed that I can't even show my face. The emperor rolled his eyes and glared at Yun Xiaoyao, his anger still lingering. Yun Xiaoyao coughed awkwardly. It was as if the stain of his concealing Yun Yang's identity this time would probably never be forgotten by his royal brother for the rest of his life. His Majesty then turned his head and warned, Your plan is indeed thorough, but there is always the slightest chance. Do not take any risks. If anything goes wrong, you must leave at the first instant. Saving your own life is the priority. Do you understand? Yes, survival comes first. Yin Yang could clearly feel the change in His Majesty's attitude this time. It was a fundamental change. Before this, the Emperor had wanted to find Supreme Cloud and control him. After all, an unconventional force that exceeded the imperial authority was a great threat to His Majesty. To those in power, it could not and should not exist. Therefore, there was a barrier between the 9 Supremes and Yutang's royalty. It was only because Yin Yang had expressed his understanding and did not mind that it did not trigger a greater conflict. In spite of this, the feeling of barrier had vanished without a trace. The ambition to control everything was nowhere to be found. What replaced it was a magnanimity that allowed all rivers to flow into the sea. Facing Yin Yang now, not only was there no longer the feeling of being in control, there was also an inexplicable sense of respect. Yes, it was respect. In spite of this, Yin Yang did not feel flattered by the Emperor's respect. He was composed and at ease. As Supreme Cloud's unparalleled achievements, Yin Yang was unperturbed by all forms of respect. The palace issued a royal edict, summoning the civil and military officials for a meeting. Everyone was ordered to rush to the palace within 2 hours. The civil and military officials walked out of their homes one after another, their faces pale and somber. There was not a hint of calmness in them. Everyone still remembered the humiliation they had suffered yesterday, but the deadline was approaching. Did His Majesty have to admit defeat in front of all the civil and military officials? This was going too far. At the same time, in the same throne room, the same number of people, including Qiu Jianhan, who had vomited blood and was bedridden yesterday, Fang Qingtian and the others who had been bedridden the moment they returned, now, all of them were standing in the throne room. Although their faces were sallow and they were panting heavily with blood stains at the corners of their mouths, not a single one of them was missing. We are Yutang's officials. When His Majesty rules the world, we accompany him, looking down on the world. When His Majesty rules the world, we accompany him, dominating Tianxian. However, when His Majesty is humiliated, we are also here, smiling at the thorns. Looking at the civil and military officials gathered in the hall, His Majesty felt a surge of warmth in his heart. This is one of my trusted subjects. They are also my right-hand men. His Majesty sat on the throne with a grim expression. The ministers and aristocrats beneath him were equally grim. The main purpose of summoning all of you today is still about yesterday's matter. The Emperor's expression was grim. Regarding the school of Kismet State, how should the imperial court confer the title? I need all of you to give your opinions and discuss this. Silence. There was a moment of deathly silence. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court were panting heavily, but not a single one of them spoke. At this moment, even the officials who usually formed cliques for personal gain, even the officials who were insatiably greedy and overbearing, even the ones who were unrestrained in their demands, no one made a sound. An indescribable silence, mixed with a sense of humiliation that came from the bottom of their hearts, gradually spread throughout the hall. His Majesty was not in a hurry. His hawk-like gaze scanned each and every one of them and said slowly, "No one speaks. Don't worry, there's no hurry. There's still time. We can discuss slowly." Chapter 788. Still, no one spoke. "Why aren't you speaking?" "I've already spoken. The one who should feel the most humiliated now should be me. I thought that I was wealthy, that I could rule over Yutong, or even the entire Tianxian land, that the land under the heavens belonged to the emperor, that those who ruled the land belonged to the emperor, that my words were the law, that my orders were strictly enforced, that no one dared to disobey. However, even after I had all these, I still had to watch the entire imperial court suffer such humiliation. Usually, all of you form cliques for personal gain, eliminate dissidents, deceive your superiors and subordinates, sell positions and titles, trample on human lives, play favoritism and fraud. Aren't all of you quite the troublemaker? Why, when someone humiliates the entire empire, are you all silent?" His Majesty's choice of words was unusually sharp and straightforward. They were like sharp, red-hot steel needles that pierced deep into the hearts of all the officials present. What you all think of as high positions and generous salaries, high positions and authority, glory and splendor, ruling over a region, taking charge of an area. What are they when faced with absolute military force? What can they do? All of you who actively participated in the shady ways for personal gain, the clean stream of the parties, and the sex of the literary school, are nothing in the face of absolute power. Can a tongue as sharp as a knife really kill such an existence? What you think of living a long life, having children and grandchildren, leaving your name in history, and being remembered for eternity, what are they when faced with absolute military force? Can you prevent your entire family from being wiped out in one day? His Majesty's voice grew colder. "I have a feeling. This feeling is uncomfortable, but it's very real. It's right before my eyes, right now." His Majesty stood up and paced back and forth in front of the dragon throne. He said calmly, "I feel that this so-called conquering the world and unifying the continent is a lofty goal in our eyes, but in the eyes of some people, it is like a tiger watching a bunch of ants fighting each other, competing to be king, watching a bunch of ants killing each other until their blood flows like a river and their bones pile up like a mountain. As for this tiger, it just watched mockingly from the side, as if it was looking at a joke. When this tiger had some kind of idea, it directly went down the mountain and rushed into the ant nest. It rushed into the middle of a group of leading ants. It only needed to say one sentence, 'Respect me. If you don't obey me, I'll kill you all.' Therefore, the group of ants who were celebrating and elated were suddenly stunned. Then, I realized that there was no other way but to yield in this situation. And so, this group of ants, who had experienced countless battles and rivers of blood and mountains of corpses, gave up, and surrendered. His Majesty's cold voice seemed to have come from the depths of hell, bringing with it a bone-piercing chill. "This is how I feel right now. I am just a slightly stronger ant, the leader of a group of ants." His Majesty said mockingly, "And now, I still have you, us ants. After so much bloodshed, when we were about to celebrate and feel glorious, we met the tiger. The tiger is here." Therefore, all the ants dared not to make a sound. His Majesty raised his finger and pointed at them one by one. He said fiercely, "A bunch of ants. Including me, all of you." He turned around and pointed his finger at his chest. He tapped it heavily, making a thumping sound. He shouted, "A bunch of ants." Everyone lowered their heads, and countless officials had tears streaming down their faces. Ants. These two words had never been like today. They were like two giant hammers, smashing into their hearts. Who would have thought that these two words would be used on them? Ants, I am an ant. Turns out, I am an ant. The atmosphere in the hall was oppressive like an impending storm, all sounds were solemn. It was then that a clear voice spoke faintly, Your Majesty is too humble. Although the school of Kismet State is somewhat capable, we are only Your Majesty's officials. How dare we overstep our boundaries? It was still the same voice from yesterday, calm and emotionless. But it was no exaggeration to say that this voice had been echoing in the minds of all the civil and military officials since yesterday, including in their dreams. It was like the whisper of a demon, causing everyone to hate it to the bone and feel pain in their hearts. Since the Empire of Yutong was founded so many years ago, be it the enemy or the opposing faction, there had never been anyone like this voice that could garner the common hatred of all civil and military officials and factions. Even Yutong's top enemy, Han Sanhe, or the Shengguan family of generals' nemesis, the late emperor of the Empire of Zhou, Zi Cheng, had never received such treatment. In spite of this, the owner of this voice had received this honor within a very short period of time after he spoke. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court, including the emperor, were filled with hatred. Since you have come with a purpose, why don't you show yourself? His Majesty said in a displeased tone, Are you afraid that someone as weak as us can keep you here? The voice chuckled faintly. Of course, this lowly one isn't worried that I can't escape unscathed. Your Majesty is the saint of a generation, about to unite the world. As an enlightened emperor who has created an unprecedented feat, how can you harbor any murderous intent towards an idler like this lowly one and degrade yourself for no reason? The reason why I haven't shown myself before Your Majesty is because this lowly one feels that my description is vulgar. Wouldn't that be a great sin for this lowly one? The emperor said faintly, But you all insist on not showing yourselves. How do I confer titles on you? The voice was taken aback. Confer titles? The emperor heaved a long sigh and said, I've thought about it for a whole night. After much deliberation, I've come to a conclusion in my helplessness, a little bit of recognition. Although the Empire of Yutong is unparalleled and has the potential to conquer Tianxian, we still lack a supreme martial force to intimidate us. This makes the so-called sovereign of the world reveal its shortcomings and it's hard to truly live up to its name. The voice hummed in agreement, obviously interested in what the Emperor of Yutong had to say and was rather moved. A wise man will speak the truth. I do not like the methods and style that your sect has displayed. I believe that any ruler or emperor would not like it. The emperor's face showed an expression of disgust that was not hidden at all. The voice said, Your Majesty, we are also helpless against the current situation. The difficulties we face are difficult to express. We will explain it to Your Majesty slowly in the future. I hope that Your Majesty will bear with it for now. We will talk about it in the future. The voice sounded a little anxious. It was obvious that the conferment just now had attracted his full attention. Naturally, it was his top priority to reduce or even put an end to the resentment of his superior. Although they were powerful and unparalleled in Yutong, they still lacked a righteous and legitimate title. This was the easiest thing to obtain in the past battles for supremacy, but they had bet on the wrong treasure this time, causing them to lose their title completely. Chapter 789. The school of Kismet State's most taboo flaw was that they did not have a legitimate reason to do so. If not for the fact that they had no other choice, they would not have gone to such extremes and coerced others with force. It was contemptible. However, seeing that the situation of the world had already gone out of control and that the fates of the heavens were no longer on their side, they became anxious. In spite of this, if Yutong's emperor could change his mind and confer titles on the school of Kismet State, it would be equivalent to patching up the last shortcoming of their current actions. Therefore, when they heard the word confer, their eyes shone instinctively. They were no longer as calm as they had been before, instead, they were filled with excitement. The emperor's face darkened as he said, From the meeting a few days ago, as well as what I know today, I already know that the strength and prestige of your noble sect is profound. It is truly extraordinary and without equal in the present age. Thus, we began to think, if your esteemed sect can change its style, no longer persisting in its tyrannical ways, we might consider conferring upon your esteemed sect the title of protector of the state religion, allowing it to spread its teachings throughout the world. Since then, the Empire of Yutong and your sect have supported each other. The Empire of Yutong has a long life, and your sect's legacy will never end. The voice said emotionally, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your magnanimity and generosity. We will definitely do our best to protect Yutong's empire forever." The emperor lightly said, "However, I have never seen any sincerity from your sect. In reality, you haven't even shown yourselves. What sincerity is there to speak of? I can't even see him, so how can I confer a title on him? I can't just confer titles to the school of Kismet State out of thin air in front of the entire imperial court, can I? Thank you, Your Majesty. I understand what Your Majesty is worried about. I will go and report to the sect leader and ask him to come and pay his respects to Your Majesty. We will discuss important matters together. I am afraid, Your Majesty, please wait for a moment." The emperor took a deep breath and said, "I also hope that your sect can be more courteous. I am the ruler of this world." The voice repeated, "Of course. Don't worry, Your Majesty. Don't worry." Then, there was no more sound. It was obvious that he couldn't wait to go and report. In the main hall, the atmosphere was still solemn, and the expressions of the ministers were still very ugly. Everyone knew that although His Majesty had spoken forcefully just now, as long as he agreed to the conferment, it would be a compromise, it would be submission. It was still a great humiliation. At most, it was just an additional layer of cloth, nothing more. How could it help? In the deathly silent atmosphere, the emperor waited with a solemn expression. However, there was a deeply hidden gratification in the depths of his eyes. The generals were all filled with righteous indignation, their temples throbbing and their eyes spitting fire. However, the civil officials all felt the same sense of humiliation. That indescribable anger was an important reason for the emperor's comfort. This is the soul of the empire. If this incident could end in Yutong's favor, the cohesiveness of Yutong's imperial court would rise to a whole new level. There would no longer be any gaps. The emperor of Yutong's words had probably hit the nail on the head of the school of Kismet State. Not long after, a clear voice rang out, the current leader of the school of Kismet State, Shimen Huanyu, together with his disciples, requests an audience with His Majesty, Emperor of Yutong. May His Majesty live long. The emperor said calmly, "Permitted." Just as his voice trailed off, there was a soft hum in the hall. 6 silhouettes appeared out of thin air. The leader had a lean face and a lanky build. He had 3 long strands of beard that made him look otherworldly. He stood quietly in the hall, but he gave off the feeling that he was an immortal who had left the world behind. It was as if he could detach himself from the mortal world and ascend to immortality at any time. This was probably the so-called sage-like demeanor that resembled that of a deity. As for the other 5 people who had come with him, each of them was quite graceful and handsome. At first glance, they gave off an indescribable, favorable impression from the bottom of one's heart. The emperor's eyes glowed with admiration almost instinctively as he asked warmly, "Shimen Huanyu?" "Yes, this lowly one." The leader of the school of Kismet State smiled faintly, poised and composed as he said, "These 2 beside this lowly one are my left and right guardians, Jiao Buqi and Meng Wuliang. These 2 are my elders, Ping Shishui and Hai Wujiang. As for the last one, he is this lowly one's unworthy junior brother and also the one who has been talking to Your Majesty, Kong Tianbua." Jiao Buqi and Meng Wuliang looked like middle-aged men while Ping Shishui and Hai Wujiang looked like elders. As for Kong Tianbua, he looked to be in his 30s, handsome and elegant. The 6 of them bowed in unison. "Greetings, Your Majesty. You may rise." His Majesty smiled and said, "The school of Kismet State is indeed full of talents. Just looking at the 6 of you is enough to inspire admiration. As expected of the top hidden sect in the world. You live up to your reputation, you live up to your reputation. This lowly one dares not accept your Majesty's praise. His Majesty waved his hand, growing more amiable. Sigh, what's there to be afraid of? The school of Kismet State has a long history, having gone through countless years since the beginning of time. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's the top sect in the world. Leader Shiman, may I ask how many disciples there are in the school of Kismet State now? Shiman Huanyu did not hesitate as he answered even more respectfully. Each generation of the school of Kismet State's disciples is limited to 360 people. This is in line with the 360 heavenly cycles. The emperor asked, 360 people? This number is a little too little. It's out of my estimation. Shiman Huanyu smiled. Your Majesty, the 360 people this lowly one mentioned earlier are only the first generation of disciples. It's not that this is the number of the entire school. There are 6 generations of disciples in the school. Counting from the first generation to the 6th, the total number is 2,180 people. The emperor smiled. It's still a little too little. When your school becomes Yutong's national guardian in the future, you'll have your responsibilities. I'm afraid you'll need to expand your manpower. Hearing the emperor's words, Shiman Huanyu was completely relieved. He could not help the corners of his lips curling into a smile. As the saying goes, time changes. Now that our school has been recognized by your Majesty, we'll naturally follow your Majesty's orders in the future. The emperor said, it's rare that the leader isn't someone who sticks to the rules. It's appropriate that you're so receptive to good advice. I'd like to make another presumptuous request. I wonder if the school of Kismet State can consider the royalty's children and the capital's noble family's children when they recruit disciples in the future? Shiman Huanyu was even more relieved. This lowly one shall remember your Majesty's words and consider them carefully. However, the school's recruitment of disciples prioritizes their aptitude. Since your Majesty has instructed, this lowly one shall obey. When the time comes, we'll first pick disciples from the range your Majesty has designated. As long as they meet the requirements, we'll take them in and nurture them wholeheartedly without reservation. The emperor smiled happily. That's great. I believe that your school will be able to nurture countless talents for the empire. How wonderful. He laughed and said, my dear ministers, what do you think? Is this a good thing? Wonderful. Ha 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 ha. The spacious Aurora Hall was silent for a moment. No one responded. Chapter 790. A chill suddenly flashed through Shiman Huanyu's eyes. The current situation was clear and obvious. Although His Majesty had agreed to the school of Kismet State's position for the sake of the bigger picture and had even changed his mind to seek closer cooperation and connection, which was undoubtedly a good sign, the school of Kismet State's actions had still offended everyone in Yutong. At least, the civil and military officials before him still held a grudge. They would need to work on this for a considerable period of time before they could truly enter Yutong's upper echelon. As for those who are stubborn, we have ways to deal with them. Shiman Huanyu's spiritual sense enveloped the entire hall, so he could clearly sense everyone's reactions. Naturally, he knew that there was no other expert in the hall other than Yun Xiaoyao. There was no threat at all. He was confident that even if people like Ling Xiaozui and Mr. Nian were to hide here, he would be able to discover them in an instant. This had nothing to do with cultivation base, but was a secret art unique to the school of Kismet State. Since there were no fluctuations, then there was nothing at all. The faint vigilance in his heart was finally put down. His Majesty seemed to have fully accepted the school of Kismet State. He was not at all offended by the disharmony in front of him. He was even nonchalant as he said with a smile, esteemed experts, I wonder where you will be staying after coming to Tiantang this time? Where will you stay? Your people will definitely be stationed in Tiantang in the future, you must plan ahead. Shiman Huanyu chuckled and said, the people of the wilderness are at ease wherever they go. It's fine as long as they settle down anywhere. His Majesty laughed heartily and said, experts do things as they please. Since that's the case, let's start the conferring ceremony immediately. Issue the decree. Before he could finish, a eunuch had already walked out with the imperial edict. Once he stood still, he announced loudly, everyone from the school of Kismet State, heed the edict. No matter how arrogant they were, no matter how unworldly they were, no matter how peerless they were, when they personally appeared and heard something like an imperial edict, they still had to formally kneel down and listen. Especially since the school of Kismet State had a favor to ask and consider themselves as Yutong's subjects, they had to be even more respectful, not daring to be the slightest bit negligent. If he didn't even give face to His Majesty, then, what kind of cooperation would there be in the future? What was there to talk about? What was there to discuss about the school of Kismet State's fundamental purpose? How could he win the trust of others if he only spoke empty words without any real action? No matter what, he had to get the title first. With that in mind, the 6 members of the school of Kismet State did not hesitate at all. They knelt down in unison the moment the eunuch announced the decree. By the will of heaven, the Emperor has decreed that the school of Kismet State has a long heritage. The Emperor of Yutong's imperial edict was lavishly worded, praising the school of Kismet State's achievements. Every word and sentence delighted Shimen Huanyu and the others. The school's mission had finally come to Yutong this time, and they could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. Could it be that the so-called end of the world was just a process of things turning from extreme to extreme, and a brighter future of our sect was right in front of us? Because of this, the school of Kismet State is specially conferred as Yutong. By the time the imperial edict was read to this point, the school of Kismet State and the others were in a state of euphoria. It was a crucial moment, so they instinctively perked up their ears and listened attentively. However, at this delicate moment, without a sound, a faint cloud of mist suddenly dissipated in the air above the hall. Then, 2 beams of sword light suddenly appeared in the sky, instantly illuminating the entire hall with a splendid radiance, boundlessly magnificent. Following closely behind the 2 beams of sword light was a flash of saber light that was imbued with an ethereal sense of agility. The saber light shimmered like stars, as if all the stars in the firmament had gathered here and shone together, glorifying Yutong. The attack this time was unpredictable. The 6 of them knew that it was absolutely safe. Shimen Huanyu had also secretly informed them that there was no threat here. However, an earth-shattering change suddenly occurred. The ambush of these 3 people could not be evaded even if they focused their attention. What more when it happened right in front of them and they were caught off guard? Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 beams of blood shot into the sky one after another. They were Jiao Buqi, Meng Wuyang, Kong Tianhua, and the others. Before they could even react, their heads had already been separated from their bodies and they had perished. Even until their deaths, their faces were still immersed in the excitement of being conferred just now. Excitement was written all over their faces. Peaceful water, boundless sea, and Shimen Huanyu, the leader of the school of Kismet State, reacted swiftly and leaped up to meet the attack. However, due to the unexpected turn of events, each of them had a wound so deep that their bones could be seen. Blood gushed out. Who is it? Shimen Huanyu's eyes were about to split open. How could he not know that he and his team had fallen into the most vicious trap? The Emperor of Yutong's proclamation was not to confer titles to the school of Kismet State, but to set up a trap. The goal was to lower the school of Kismet State's wariness to the lowest level before annihilating them in one fell swoop. Based on this point alone, it was not considered a treacherous scheme that exceeded everyone's expectations. Looking at all the strange and overt plots that the school of Kismet State had encountered and seen for the past 10,000 years, they were at least child's play, if not insignificant. What truly shocked Shimen Huanyu was the 3 people who had acted in this plot. The cultivation base of these 3 people was not only profound, but each of their cultivation base was on par with his. 2 of them even surpassed him by a notch or 2. This was an absurd, incomprehensible, and unbelievable reality. There were no experts in Yutong. Shimen Huanyu was confident that he had found out about this. This was further confirmed by Yutong's unrivaled expert, Yun Xiaoyao, yesterday. This was also the main reason why the school of Kismet State had acted so brazenly in the past few days and had entered the palace openly today. Shimen Huanyu was confident that even if Yutong was unwilling to be threatened and had set up an ambush, he and his team would be able to react at once and counterattack. To him, Yutong's palace was like walking on flat ground. There was no danger at all. After what had happened yesterday, Shimen Huanyu was even more relieved. After all, if Yutong had another unparalleled expert, the Emperor of Yutong would have attacked long ago when he was threatened to this extent. It was impossible for him to watch from the sidelines. Furthermore, the ability of Yutong's most formidable martial expert, King Xiaoyao, might have already entered the ranks of the world's top-notch experts. However, it was not in the eyes of the school of Kismet State. If this was the extent of Yutong's higher-ups' ability, no matter what kind of trap, ambush, or plot they had, it would not amount to much. That was why he dared to come here without hesitation. What was more, he had just checked with the school's arcane method. How did the three of them hide? His mind was a mess. There was only one question in his mind: how was this possible? How could these three people hide under his detection? Chapter 791. Shimen Huanyu had always been wise, always planning before taking action. As the leader of the school of Kismet State, he had been highly respected all these years and no one dared to defy him. He could be said to be the wisest man of his generation. Now, the sudden appearance of the three experts had stunned him. Half of the 6 people from the school of Kismet State who had arrived were killed in the blink of an eye. Even the 3 lucky survivors were all heavily injured, and their battle prowess had been completely extinguished. Such a devastating loss was unprecedented in the long history of the school of Kismet State. Who are you? Who are you? Hai Wujiang parried the attacks hurriedly, his body constantly injured and blood spattering. He roared in terror, his voice filled with terror. The person who was fighting him was swaying back and forth like a phantom. A chilling voice rang abruptly. Didn't the school of Kismet State investigate before coming to Yutong? Don't you know that Yutong's guardian is called Supreme Cloud? Supreme Cloud? His ability. How can he be so powerful? Hai Wujiang roared. Supreme Cloud definitely doesn't have such formidable ability. That's why I said that you all didn't investigate properly before this. I really don't know what your school, which claims to have a legacy of 10,000 years, is relying on. Have you all lived your lives in vain? Yin Yang said coldly, forget it, forget it. Once you've gone underground and become a malicious spirit, information won't matter anymore. Rest in peace in the underworld. Then, he hollered, see that? The 18 abysses of hell. A glint of saber light flashed as 8 eerie Azura hells appeared in midair. After the battle that day, Yun Yang, who had been baptized by actual combat, had obviously improved his comprehension of saber truth, Destiny Blade. Within a single move, the number of Azura hells had increased to 8. The countless malicious spirits contained within them seemed to be about to surge out with a howl. Hai Wujiang could not defend himself against such a vicious move. With a cry, his body was severed into 2 and he was sent off like a ghost. On the other side, Ling Xiaozui's dense sword light shrouded Ping Shishui within it. Ping Shishui's cultivation base was inferior to Ling Xiaozui's, and he was caught in a disadvantageous position. He tried his best to hold on, putting up a desperate fight, but fear was already written all over his face. Ling Xiaozui, why is it you? Why is it you? This person's cultivation base was extremely high, but compared to Ling Xiaozui, he was still much weaker. Ling Xiaozui's expression was cold as he said faintly, since the beginning of time in Tianxian, the imperial power has never been manipulated by martial sections. The position of the continent's overlord is not a pie that can be manipulated by those with ulterior motives. Did the school of Kismet State think that it could be controlled just because it had existed for too long? You who have violated the rules of Shouja can be eliminated. Ping Shishui shouted repeatedly, but new wounds appeared on his body one after another. Fresh blood spurted from his mouth, and it was obvious that he couldn't hold on for much longer. His demise was imminent. Those who stand in my way shall die. Among the 3 battles, the only one from the school of Kismet State who was not at a disadvantage was Shimen Huanyu's side. He was bathed in blood and his expression was ferocious. His graceful and carefree demeanor a moment ago was long gone and nowhere to be seen. Facing Dugucho, he attacked with all his might like a madman, but Dugucho was like an unshakable mountain that stood before him. Dugucho's defense was solid, rendering all his attacks futile. Strictly speaking, Shimen Huanyu's cultivation base was extremely high. If he had not been injured and fought Dugucho in a fair fight, even if he could not defeat the latter in the end, he could have at least exchanged 1,000 blows with the latter. However, the situation now was different. Not only was he injured from the ambush, but the disciples he had brought with him had also died. Everything that had happened had long shaken him and thrown him into disarray. How could he be lucky when facing a veteran unrivaled expert like Dugucho? If Dugucho had not thought that victory was within his grasp and did not want to take the risk to drag the battle out, he would have seized the opportunity to counterattack and end the battle. As Shimen Huanyu's relentless attacks were futile, the moment his mind cleared up, he saw the corpses of Hai Wujiang, Jiao Buqi, Meng Wuliang, Kong Tianbua, and the rest lying on the ground. How could he not know that the situation was hopeless? With a sudden roar, his sword light grew unprecedentedly bright. He charged toward the emperor without a care for his own safety. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. That was their only chance of survival. Only by holding the emperor hostage could they have a chance to escape. Dugucho spun, his sword swung horizontally and with a flick, a sword mountain materialized and came crashing down. It sealed off all of Shimen Huanyu's paths of advance. Unexpectedly, Shimen Huanyu's move was actually a diversionary tactic. When he saw that the mountain of swords was about to descend upon him, he leaped into the air and with a spin of his body, 3 clones appeared. They were like 3 streaks of light streaking through the sky as they rushed out of the hall, trying to escape. This man was a wise man. His wish of holding the emperor hostage was too beautiful, but it was difficult to realize. Instead, he made a feint and fled with all his might. Seeing that Shimen Huanyu was about to escape, Dugucho's sword light expanded abruptly and blocked one of the rays. With a flash of lightning, a shadow was cleaved into 2. Ling Xiaozui flew over in a slanted manner, the tip of his sword grazing Ping Shishui's neck. As a large head flew up, it also blocked a ray of light. Then, the sword wind whistled and tore the head into dust. However, the last third streak of light had already rushed to the entrance of the hall with unparalleled speed. With just one more step, they would be able to soar into the vast sea and soar into the sky. Whether it was Ling Xiaozui or Dugucho, they could not stop it in time. At this moment, a murderous aura filled the hall. Yin Yang's voice rang out once more. Slaughter the world. So what? While his voice was still echoing, a dazzling sword light suddenly appeared in the world in an extremely stunning manner. It also rushed out at an unparalleled speed. The speed of this sword light far exceeded the speed of lightning. It was a swordsmanship. Yin Yang, who had always used the saber, had actually executed a swordsmanship at this critical juncture. The murderous aura of this swordsmanship was immense, the malice was heavy, and the power was unrivaled. It made Ling Xiaozui and Dugucho, who had witnessed this swordsmanship, feel a chill run down their spines. Their hearts chilled as they shuddered uncontrollably. Every single strand of hair on their bodies stood on end. What a terrifying technique! Just as Shimen Huanyu, who had flown out of the hall, felt a sliver of relief when he saw the regal veranda move, he suddenly felt his heart palpitate, followed by a chill in his chest. He, who was flying at high speed in the air, subconsciously looked down, only to see a shiny sword tip suddenly poking out of his chest. The cold light was dazzling, and it was stained with bright red blood. Shimen Huanyu's eyes bulged. I've been stabbed. How could this be? Chapter 792. Then, a spurt of blood gushed out violently. It was also at this moment that Shimen Huanyu felt as if his entire body had been struck by lightning. In that instant, he lost all of his strength. His consciousness had almost completely dissipated, and he no longer had any control over his body. Relying on inertia, he slid weakly through the air for over 10 meters before falling down with a whoosh. As he fell, Shimen Huanyu's body twitched. He lifted his head with all his might and looked back, murmuring, "Who killed me? Who?" In his eyes, there was a young man dressed in purple with the setting sun behind him, making him look extremely radiant. Shimen Huanyu squinted his eyes and tried his best to look, but the sunlight was so bright that he couldn't see clearly. He, who was nearing the end of his life, could only feel his body growing lighter and lighter, as if he had melted under the sunlight. The youth's purple silhouette seemed to be carrying the entire sun on his back, making his silhouette appear even larger and more majestic in the shadow. "It was me." The youth's voice was cold. "I killed you." Shimen Huanyu's consciousness gradually blurred. He chuckled bitterly. Great sword skill." His head tilted to the side and he fell silent. At this point, the souls of the 6 people from the school of Kismet State had all returned to the netherworld and were on their way to the underworld. Clap, clap, clap. Crisp applause rang out. His Majesty, who was dressed in a bright yellow robe, walked out of the hall slowly and applauded. Excellent. Everything seemed to have happened too abruptly and the entire process was too short. It was only then that the civil and military officials seemed to have come back to life. The atmosphere was instantly heated up. "I see. I was wondering, that's right. With Supreme Cloud here, how could these clowns succeed? I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. How satisfying, ha ha ha, all hail Supreme Cloud." On the other side, Ling Xiaozu and Dugu Cho exchanged glances, feeling disgruntled and aggrieved. F***CK. Both of us have contributed a lot in this battle, haven't we? Why did all of you only see Supreme Cloud? Without both of our help, how could this battle have ended so smoothly with Yun Yang alone? Could it be that both of us, the unrivaled experts, are invisible in your eyes? Yes. The 6 leaders of the school of Kismet State were all captured in one fell swoop, completely annihilated. Qiu Jianhan, Fang Qingtian, and the rest of the elders felt like they had regained the last radiance of the setting sun, their faces brimming with joy. In fact, they were not the only ones. All the civil and military officials in the court were beaming with joy, their worried expressions swept away. He had never felt such great satisfaction before, and he had never felt such pleasure. After a few heartfelt words of gratitude, His Majesty pulled Yun Yang aside and said softly, "Well, if the roots are not removed, the weeds will grow again." It was obvious that the emperor was still wary and concerned about the remaining forces of the school of Kismet State. He did not hide his intention to wipe out the latent threat. Even though the higher-ups of the school of Kismet State had been annihilated, leaving them without a leader, the overall combat strength of this reclusive sect was too high. Even the strength of those who were left was enough to make the secular dynasties wary. They could easily become a source of extreme instability. We don't have to annihilate them all. Let's see if we can try to divide a portion of them. There should be a portion of them that can be used by the nation. The Grand Tutor suggested softly with a frown. The Grand Tutor's words were righteous. There was no right or wrong in power, only the person who wielded it. If Yutang could really take the school of Kismet State's forces for its own use, it would be greatly beneficial and significant. Even if it was only a portion, it would be a significant boost to Yutang's capability. His Majesty said faintly, "I don't think there's a need for that." It was difficult to control an overly powerful external force. Stability should be the priority now. No matter how tempting the fruit was, it could only be compatible with a certain level of capability. Yin Yang said, "If so, the school of Kismet State shall cease to exist from this world." A sect that threatened the imperial authority and all the officials in the imperial court would become a thorn in everyone's flesh, a nightmare at night, even if only one person remained. There were only two outcomes for the school of Kismet State to embark on this path: success, or a complete failure. If they succeeded, they could continue and even grow stronger, but if they failed, the only path left for the school was to be completely annihilated. The survival of the school of Kismet State was decided by the words of the Emperor of Yutong and Yunyang. It had been a long time since Yunyang and the other two had left, but the Emperor and the officials were still agitated. "I've made a new decision," His Majesty said. "Throughout history, the imperial court has mainly chosen scholars for the examinations. They're used to reading poetry and literature, but there's a flaw that can't be overlooked. Scholars are well-read and knowledgeable, but their limitations are too great. Once they encounter an attack of absolute force, no matter how knowledgeable they are or how good their character is, it's useless. They can only sigh helplessly, unable to do anything. Although the martial sciences are offered every year, strictly speaking, it's just muddling through and perfunctory. The so-called selection of talents is only from a fixed number of noble children. It can be said that the possibility of truly skilled martial artists serving the nation has been completely eliminated." His Majesty said, "I wish to reopen the martial sciences." These sudden words could be said to be earth-shattering. Although the courtiers knew that His Majesty had received an unprecedented shock from this incident, these words still made the courtiers feel dizzy. "Set up a ranking of 18 weapons and a ranking of martial strength. The nation will recognize them and grant them corresponding titles." The Emperor said, "The ranking, the nation's official rank, what restraints are needed, what functions are needed, what systems and rules are in place. I'll leave it to all of you to figure out the specific operation." His Majesty said, "I'll leave this to Old Grand Tutor, Old Grand Commandant, and the others to discuss and come up with a plan as soon as possible." There was a pause before his tone turned serious. "This will be Yutong's basic national policy from now on. It will never change. I don't wish to see anyone slacking on it." He said heavily, word by word, "I do not wish to be humiliated like this again. I'll give all of you half a year to complete this agreement. Carry it out to the world." His Majesty left after he finished speaking. The officials exchanged looks of bewilderment. As the saying went, one word from the top would cause the people below to break their legs. His Majesty could be unreasonable and only seek results, but what if the officials did the same? If they did well, they would punish them for deceiving the Emperor. Inaction would never do. As the person directly involved in this matter, the Grand Preceptor was stunned. After being stunned for a long time, he rushed towards Fang Qingtian in exasperation. "Grand Commandant, you have been with His Majesty for the past few days. I want to know what is going on." Fang Qingtian rolled his eyes and said, "It's not just me. Weren't you there as well? What's going on is what's going on." The Grand Tutor said angrily, "This is reopening the martial sciences, and the rewards are so heavy, how can this be? Since ancient times, there have been many examples of heroes breaking the law with their martial arts. Now that we've set an example." Fang Qingtian said angrily, "The evidence of heroes breaking the law with their martial arts is right before our eyes. Everyone here is a witness just now. What else is there to say? Do you think everyone is blind? However, how can cultivators be restrained? It's still cultivators who can do it. Besides, since heroes have broken the law with their martial arts, there are also scholars who have broken the law with their literature. Why didn't you say anything? Was the disturbance that all of you worked together to deal with a few days ago caused by scholars who broke the law? Why don't all of you scholars, who have been in the imperial court for thousands of years, take the initiative to resign? Why don't all of you get lost first and talk about the rest?" Chapter 793. The Grand Preceptor flew into a rage. "You're pestering endlessly. I'm just stating the facts and not pointing fingers." Fang Qingtian snorted and said, "I'm just stating the facts, but I'm specifically pointing out that history is a mirror to prove the rise and fall of the world. This is the way of the world. Now, I'm going to work. Whether you come or not is your business. Anyway, if you don't come, I will report to His Majesty. If you slack off, I'll have to report it to my superiors. If you don't work, I'll have to report it. If you don't do a good job, I'll still have to report it. The Grand Preceptor's lips trembled in anger. Fong Qing Tian, old fart Fong, old fart Fong. You, Fong Qing Tian raised his head. What about me? Isn't impeaching people the favorite thing you bunch of scholars used to do? Tian was sanctimoniously impeaching this and that, constantly mentioning His Majesty. This subject has a memorial. Humph, will be the same in the future. Isn't it just a rumor? Who doesn't know how to do it? Don't want to work? How can there be such a good thing in the world if you want to get a salary without working? Fong Qing Tian said loudly, from now on, we will be His Majesty's inquisitors, the imperial censors and imperial censors among the generals. If there's anything I don't like, I'll just report it. That's all. The Grand Tutor was so angry that his beard trembled. Fong Qing Tian strode away. Are you coming? Are you coming or not? Go. Then what are we waiting for? But this job is tedious and complicated. How can a few people finish it? No one stopped you from finding someone else to do it. But where can I find people? Why didn't you look for him? You are the person directly responsible for this matter that His Majesty appointed. If you don't find someone, you will be slacking and defying the imperial edict. This will be the first thing I will say when I want to impeach you. Do you think I wouldn't dare? You, the Grand Tutor almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He was one of the 3 hooligans in the capital. The treasured blade was not old, it really was not old. Me too, I want to accuse you as well. This old man has seen all of this with my own eyes. I won't feel good if I don't spit it out. Qiu Jianhan jumped out. Well said. I'll impeach him too. Leng Daoyin said. In the future, we will also report our matters to this memorial. Impeach him every day. Yes. The 3 biggest hooligans of the capital attacked together. No one could stop them. Who could compete with them? The civil officials' mouths and eyes were crooked. Looking at these old hooligans who were becoming more and more aggressive, they only felt speechless and depressed in their hearts. Brother, are you really going to start the martial sciences again? Yin Xiaoyao asked in the palace. Of course. Not only do I want to open it again, I want to open it with super high treatment. His Majesty said, I have set up a strategy of 3 generations of emperors to completely control Yutang's martial arts and reign supreme in the world. Let all martial artists in the world accept the martial sciences and be proud of it. If that's the case, then I'm afraid that the incident of the hero breaking the law with his martial arts might really. Yin Xiaoyao said worriedly. We don't do that now, but are there fewer cases of heroes breaking the law with their martial arts? The emperor asked with a smile. This. Yin Xiaoyao was speechless. Indeed, this kind of thing would happen no matter when. Since there's no way to stop it, then let's clear it up, the emperor said. Rather than blocking it, it's better to open it up. Yin Xiaoyao replied, what my royal brother says makes sense, but why did you say that it was only a strategy for 3 generations of monarchs? This is a matter of national importance that will ensure long-term stability. The emperor glanced at him with a smile. After 3 generations, more than 100 years will have passed, his voice was distant. By then, basically, all the heroes in the world will have been recruited by the martial sciences. By then, it will definitely become a situation where the imperial court's martial sciences will control the martial world. And after 3 generations, how much of the martial world will still exist? By then, the existence of the martial sciences will be a waste of manpower and money. As long as the martial sciences are suppressed to a level that the country can bear after 3 generations, that will be the national policy for 10,000 generations. Only when there is not much difference between the civil and the martial, only when there is a conflict of occupations and not a great disparity in strength, will the era of true unification come. By then, it will truly be, that all under the heavens belong to the king, and all who lead the land belong to the king. Now, these two sentences are only a reflection of the moon in the water, nothing more. The emperor was obviously in high spirits as he spoke more thoroughly to Yun Xiaoyao. I see. Yun Xiaoyao could not help but sigh in his heart. Was the path of martial arts still so difficult? Would there never be a day of success? This is the art of an emperor. The emperor patted Yun Xiaoyao's shoulder. Brother, the emperor has no right to have personal preferences. Yun Xiaoyao did not speak. After a long time, he sighed in melancholy. I'm afraid I can only entrust the matter of annihilating the school of Kismet State to both of you, Yun Yang said with a flushed face as he walked out of the palace. Du Guqiu asked curiously, why don't you go? It's not a problem for the two of us to go, but without you, we won't have a legitimate reason to go. Yun Yang smiled. It's still not suitable for me to appear in public for now. The Four Seasons Tower's manpower has most likely arrived in the capital city. If I were to expose myself, I'm afraid it will accelerate the deterioration of the situation and the consequences will be unimaginable. I've already sent a message to King Yun about going out without a legitimate reason. He, Bai Shue, Fang Mafei, and Lao Mei will assist the two seniors to annihilate the school of Kismet State. It's perfectly justifiable and logical. Du Guqiu wanted to say that Yun Yang could turn into a cloud or disguise himself as someone else. Why would there be so many concerns? Yun Yang had already used a similar tactic once, but he did not speak after some thought. Ling Xiaozui said from the side, even so, the matter of annihilating the school of Kismet State is still troublesome. After all, not only do we have to eliminate the members of the school of Kismet State who have come to the capital city, we have to destroy the school as well. Is this what you mean? Yes, said Yun Yang. Ling Xiaozui smiled meaningfully. I'm afraid there will be more twists and turns in this matter. The school of Kismet State has been claiming to be the legitimate successor of Kismet State for so many years. It has even tried its best to help the continent's overlords unite and some sovereigns build their own nations. There must be a significant reason behind this. Don't you want to know these details? Yun Yang smiled and said, Senior, you're right. This is indeed another reason I don't want to go. He paused and said, there are some things that are best left untouched. It would be best to cease to exist in this world from now on. Ling Xiaozui and Du Guqiu exchanged a glance. Feeling Yun Yang's meticulousness, they nodded in agreement. The annihilation of the school of Kismet State. Yun Yang was silent for a moment before he said, I'm guessing that the school of Kismet State must be hiding secrets, many, many secrets. Looking at Ling Xiaozui and Du Guqiu, he smiled. However, I'm not interested in knowing any of these secrets. Ling Xiaozui took a deep breath and said in a low voice, I understand. Du Guqiu's face was filled with admiration as he looked at Yun Yang, a little touched. What Yun Yang had done was equivalent to gifting the countless resources and secrets that the school of Kismet State had accumulated for tens of thousands of years to the two of them. Stones from other mountains could be used to improve jade. What more, top-notch cultivators whose cultivation base had already reached their level. Chapter 794. If there are any gains, it will definitely involve closed-door cultivation. Yun Yang smiled. Yun Yang wishes both of you a smooth breakthrough first. Ling Xiaozui said in a low voice, we will rush back as soon as we can before your battle with the Four Seasons Tower. The Four Seasons Tower is also our nemesis. You are not the only enemy. Yun Yang smiled but did not speak. Now that we are about to part, Yun Yang has another gift for both of you. Perhaps, it will be of help when the time comes. Yun Yang flipped his wrist and a purple aura rose from his palm. It was 2 purple crystals. Holding them in his hands, he gave one to each of them. Just coming into contact with the comfortable aura of the crystal stone, the two of them already felt refreshed. When they clearly saw the true appearance of the crystal stone, their expressions changed at the same time. Their eyes suddenly shot out a bright light, that kind of surprise. It was impossible to conceal that kind of feeling. Could this be the legendary Eastern Amethyst, the legendary Eastern Amethyst that can transform a cultivator? The two experts' eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets as they exclaimed in shock. Even their faces paled, their hearts pounding so hard that they almost jumped out of their throats. Even with their almost unruffled cultivation base and temperament, they could not help but be shaken by the two purple crystals, their realms destabilizing. This was a legendary item that very few people had ever seen in countless years. Just this one piece alone would be worth more than a city if it was converted into wealth. It should be said that if they had this item, they would never exchange it even if others were to use the wealth of an entire country to exchange for it. The Eastern Amethyst. There was another saying that was passed down through the ages. It was called the Stairway to Heaven. As the name suggested, with this so-called Eastern Amethyst, it was equivalent to having a stairway that could directly ascend to heaven. This was also the origin of the item's other name. No. This item is too precious. Both of us can't afford it. Even though the two of them were extremely reluctant to part with it, even drooling with desire, and the desire in their hearts was like a raging fire that was difficult to suppress, the two great experts still suppressed it with great difficulty, and opened their mouths to refuse. This item was not an ordinary treasure of heaven and earth. Once he accepted the favor, he would owe too much. Of course, the most important thing was that Yun Yang might not know the true use and value of this item. If he were to regret it in the future, everyone would be in an awkward position. In that instant of conscience interrogation, Ling Xiaozue and Du Guchou felt that if they had given such a thing away, they would probably regret it for the rest of their lives. They would definitely be plagued by inner demons. So this thing is called the Eastern Amethyst? Yun Yang was hit with a sudden realization. That's a pretty name. You actually don't know? The two of them laughed bitterly. If that's the case, then all the more we can't accept it. Yun Yang chuckled and said, how can I not know that both old brothers are treating me so generously? Although I don't know the name of this item and I don't know how effective it is. I really don't lack this item here. Although I don't have a lot, I have at least a dozen pieces. As the saying goes, the rarer an item is, the more valuable it is. I've given both of you one piece each and I've left a dozen pieces behind. It's only right that I give both of you one piece. 10, a dozen pieces? Both of them stared at each other, their voices changing at once. Even if there was only one or half of such a highly coveted treasure of heaven and earth, an immortal item, it was already a source of great fortune. He had given away 2 pieces with just a wave of his hand, and he still had a dozen pieces with him. So many. If it were not for their extraordinary composure and clear state of mind, they might have grabbed their weapons and robbed Yun Yang. Yun Yang nodded seriously, indicating that he really had more. The saying that the rarer an item was, the more valuable it was not an excuse. Yun Yang thought to himself, if I were to tell you that I still have a few 100,000 pieces of this item, will I be robbed on the spot? Giving 1 or 2 pieces to a good friend from a dozen pieces of good stuff was a sign of loyalty. If one were to give a piece of a few 100,000 pieces to someone else, it would be a shameful act. No matter how precious or rare it was, it would still sound bad. This was the truth, no matter where one went. I've actually distributed this item a long time ago. Not only do the two of you have it, King Yun, Bai Shue, Lao Mei, Fang Mafei, and old disciple Chou, Yun Yang smiled. Each of you has 1 piece, and I've kept 2 pieces for myself. You don't have to be so courteous. Only then did Ling Xiaozue and Du Guchou accept it sheepishly. Just as they accepted it, they hurriedly kept it into their spatial rings. As the item fell into their pockets, both of them still felt like they were dreaming. How could he have gotten his hands on such a precious item so easily? This is too unreal. It was said that whenever such an item appeared, there would be a bloodbath and a martial world calamity or something. Shouldn't tens of thousands of lives be sacrificed first to see the results and put an end to it? Even if there was only 1 piece of this item, it was already not inferior to the 17th master of the Abyss's dragon hide treasure map. The previous martial world calamity had taken the lives of tens of thousands of people. But in front of him, what was going on? As the saying went, pies falling from the sky, no, it should be immortal pies. Could it not be more than this? Yin Yang, you have to be careful in the future. Ling Xiaozui warned him seriously, don't simply use it. Don't let anyone know that you have this item, especially when you reach the bound of universe in the future. Use it as soon as possible if you can. Really, this item contains the traces of Tao and even the secrets of primordial chaos. Remember, be cautious. Don't worry, I understand. Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou did not waste any more time. They quickly found the school of Kismet State's base and slaughtered everyone there, not even waiting for Yun Xiaoyao, Bai Yixue, and the others. The main reason was that Yun Yang's generosity had shocked both of them so much that they were a little dazed. There was also an inexplicable excitement that drove them out of the city in the middle of the night to annihilate the school of Kismet State. When they were 7,000 miles away from Tiantang City, they still felt a little dazed. He gave it to us just like that? Du Guchou felt that his brain had been working at its maximum speed. He was inexplicably excited, so excited that he dared not believe that reality was real. Yes. Ling Xiaozui, who shared the same sentiments, had the same impulse to take it out and touch it in his palm to feel its true existence. No matter what, the two of us still owe him a big favor. Du Guchou sighed. Although it was a sigh, the excitement and joy in his voice could not be contained. Who says otherwise? Ling Xiaozui sighed. I'm the same as you. First, I'm surprised by his generosity. Second, I'm deeply impressed by Supreme Cloud's way of doing things. It's really extraordinary. Oh. What do you mean? Asked Du Guchou. Do you feel that you're closer to him? That you don't actually feel that you owe him too much? Asked Ling Xiaozui. That's right, of course. Du Guchou said, but there's still a sense of gratitude. As for the other things that you said, I really don't owe him. Of course? How can it be so natural? You've accepted such a dreamy item that only exists in legends, yet you're calm about it. Other than being surprised, you don't have many other thoughts. What do you mean? Asked Ling Xiaozui. Du Guchou was stunned. Yes, why did he not feel that he owed Yun Yang much when he accepted such an immortal opportunity? Thinking about it, it did not make sense at all. Chapter 795. Don't you understand? Do you really not understand? This is only a situation that Supreme Cloud has deliberately created. Ling Xiaozui sucked in a soft breath, his gaze unusually distant and deep. You and Yun Yang have only known each other for a short time. Supreme Cloud has his own way of doing things, there's no need to create a gap. Ling Xiaozui said, the reason we feel this way is all because of him. What do you mean? All along, since we first met, Supreme Cloud has always been the weaker party in front of you and me. Now, we've acknowledged that we're on equal footing. Is that true? More than that. Du Guchou chuckled humorlessly. Now, I always feel like I'm centered around him. All along, while we've been helping him, we've also been receiving benefits from him in return. Have you ever seen anyone reaping without sowing or simply receiving without putting in any effort here with Yun Yang? I really haven't. Everyone has their own responsibilities, doing their own things. Even when they occasionally cross paths, there's no chaos at all. That's right. Including us. We have been helping him all this time. Even though our original intention was to help him advance, we did not ask for anything in return. However, he has been repaying us in all kinds of ways, including sparring with us. Do you think that he really needs it as badly as we think? Is he the only one who's improved through sparring? Other than the first time, he did need to consolidate his cultivation base and refine his martial skills, but the sparring twice a day after that exhausted him to the point of exhaustion. It's not necessary for him. I can say without reservation that what he's consolidating is only his foundation, but what we've received is a limitless path forward. Every aspect of our bodies, cultivation methods, and deific consciousness have improved because of it. These benefits are absolutely unnecessary for him. Twice the work but half the effort. That's true. Come to think of it, we've long accepted his grace unknowingly, leveling both our positions to the same level. Including this time, when he asked us to annihilate the school of Kismet State, we had to deal with it, but he promised us all the benefits of the school of Kismet State. He didn't touch a single drop of it himself. On the surface, this is what we deserve. We've annihilated the entire school of Kismet State. Who else could those things belong to if not us? But if he goes with us, can you swallow your pride and snatch something from a junior? Moreover, he was standing on the righteous side. As long as he went, at least 80% of these things would be his. Do you approve of this arrangement? It's not just approval. It's fine even if they all end up in his pocket. If that's the case, it's not unreasonable to say that these things were given by him. Yes, but this isn't enough. Ling Xiaozui guffawed as he soared through the clouds like a bolt of lightning, moving as fast as the wind. The higher-ups of the school of Kismet State were all executed and the school was annihilated. However, the storm they had stirred up was far from over. At least, the residence of Yun was still crowded with people, sweating profusely and overcrowded. A gust of wind hovered in the sky for a while, observing for a moment before it left. At this moment, Lao Mei was the only one left in the residence of Yun with a bitter face. Well, he was not really the only one. There was also a group of newly recruited guards scattered all over the place in charge of receiving and guiding the visitors. However, this welcoming task was extremely tedious and troublesome. Yet, they could not lose their temper, not even the slightest inappropriate expression could be seen. As long as they did not receive the guests properly, they could be considered to be putting on airs and oppressing others with their authority. At the heart of the storm, the slightest bit of disturbance could cause a great deal of trouble in the future. As for the others, the four noble young masters were the first to see the opportunity, escaping with their guards at once. Fang Mafei and Bai Yishua, master and disciple, could no longer continue after the first day of receiving the guests and disappeared without a trace. Yin Xiaoyao had been staying in the palace for the past few days and did not return home. Bao had followed him to the palace for a short stay as well. Ji Lingxi had gone to stay at Shangguan Lingxiu's house as well. Although Lady Ji was delighted that her sweetheart was popular, admired, and respected, the degree of greeting was far beyond what she could bear. Besides, her staying here was too big of a target. Chapter 796. Lao Mei was the only one who realized in shock that he was the one with the worst fate. By the time he realized that these people were gone, it was already too late for him to escape. He, the major domo of the residence of Yun, was the only one left in the entire residence. He had to take charge and deal with everything on his own. This was truly a case of a single tree propping up a skyscraper. However, this housekeeper felt like he could die of exhaustion at any time now. Looking at the pious crowd who came to pay their respects to Supreme Cloud, Lao Mei's heart was grief-stricken, but he still put on a radiant face. His words were like the endless spring rain, and he smiled even before he spoke. It was refreshing. The breeze was gentle, leaving no trace as it passed. Yin Yang, who had turned into a breeze, did not dare to linger and left right away. What a joke. The current situation was definitely a place of trouble. He could not go down. He turned and strolled around the tower to Heaven Inn. As expected, the four noble young masters and more than 30 guards from their families were staying here. Yin Yang could not help chuckling as he looked at them enjoying themselves. Putting himself in their shoes, he could not find fault with the four noble young masters' desertion. Thus, he did not go down but went to the Shangguan family of generals. With his deific consciousness, he realized that not only was Ji Lingxi there, Bai Yixue, Fang Mafei, and Xiao Xiaoqing were there as well. It was normal for Xiao Xiaoqing, who had lifted the ban on alcohol, to hold a wine jar. From time to time, he would take out a peanut from his pocket and throw it into his mouth. During this period of time, he was basically in a state of muddle-headedness and satisfaction. This was probably the state of riding the clouds and floating in the air that he had been pursuing for a long time. Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu were drinking tea in the hall of the courtyard, looking very peaceful. Bai Yixue and Fang Mafei sat on the left and right respectively, one high and one low, one sitting on the roof while the other leaned against the yard door. Although they looked lazy, the mystical qi that flowed around both of them was unusually lively. Their current state was enough to ensure the safety of the two ladies should there be any accidents. Even if the world's pinnacle assassins were to attack, they could still buy some time for the ladies. Yin Yang nodded in satisfaction. Looking at their alertness, he was sure that he had found the right people. As for Xiao Xiaoqing, Yin Yang no longer held any hope for him. This matter proved that this guy was just a salted fish from the outside to the inside. Other than drinking, dizziness, and sleeping, he really didn't care about anything else. This fellow, along with the four noble young masters, was categorized by Yun Yang as a group of people who did not seek to improve themselves. There were also four whiteys rolling around in the yard like little white pom-poms. Looking at this side, all he could see was peace and happiness. In spite of it, Yun Yang could still sense a faint, eerie aura hovering above the yard, causing the peace and tranquility in front of him to be tinged with an indistinct gloominess. The aura was both real and illusory. Even with Yun Yang's current level of deific consciousness, he still could not quite grasp it. It was even more difficult to find the exact location of the source of the aura. Only the discomfort that he suppressed in his heart was real and unusually tangible. Another piece of evidence that made Yun Yang suspicious of the presence of the eerie aura came from Ji Lingxi, who was in the pavilion. Young Lady Ji would look around suspiciously every once in a while, her gaze filled with uncertainty and suspicion. Obviously, Ji Lingxi had also sensed the presence of the aura. However, just like Yun Yang, she could not confirm the actual location of the aura. In spite of this, her worried expression had already said too much. This is the surveillance of the deific consciousness of a pinnacle expert of this world? Yin Yang thought to himself, for such an expert to perform such surveillance at this time and place, it's obvious that he's looking for me, using the group of people below to lock onto me. In other words, the people below are already in considerable danger. However, under such surveillance, how do I enter? What can we do to resolve the current crisis without alerting the enemy? The other party obviously knew where Yun Yang's real weakness was, Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu. As long as they could monitor this area, they would be able to wait for Yun Yang before long. If there was a need, he could even capture the two ladies and force Yun Yang to show himself. This was the other danger of Yun Yang's identity as Supreme Cloud being exposed. The Supreme Cloud of the past did not have such a weakness to exploit. The light breeze that Yun Yang had turned into drifted to and fro leisurely. It was only when he was about to leave that there was an unusual ripple, whether it was intentional or not. Then, the manifestation of the wind dissipated into nothingness, returning to a standstill. The deific consciousness that had an uncertain location shook visibly. In the next moment, countless deific consciousnesses soared into the sky from all directions, locking down the space of dozens of miles above the Shangguan family of generals in an instant, leaving nothing behind. Countless tyrannical forces whizzed about in the sky, wreaking havoc in the air and shattering it. There were even more powerful forces that soared into the sky, sweeping back and forth at a height of about 10,000 feet above the ground. From afar, a few deific consciousnesses rushed over from all directions, forming another layer of encirclement. For a moment, the countless forces shuffled back and forth in the air. The unimaginable spectacle shocked Yun Yang. How much force has the Four Seasons Tower mobilized? Yun Yang thought to himself, could it be that the Four Seasons Tower wants to finish everything in one go? To end my existence once and for all? That's exactly what I intend to do. However, I have to arrange everything first. It was the same pawn shop from the other day. Shui Wuyin reclined lazily in the round-backed chair while Yun Yang, who was also lounging lazily beside him. Of course, Yun Yang had already changed his appearance. "How is it?" asked Yun Yang. "The situation is tense, unprecedentedly tense." Shui Wuyin's face was expressionless, one of his legs crossed as he swayed back and forth. However, there wasn't the slightest bit of leisurely atmosphere in his words. "The Four Seasons Tower has been tracking down the Nine Heavens Dictum's members recently. Just in these 4 days alone, 19 of the Nine Heavens Dictum's brothers have been lost." Yin Yang's heart tightened. "How did you deal with it?" Shui Wuyin was expressionless. "I have to be responsible for the majority of the remaining people." Yin Yang's expression darkened. That means it's exactly what you're thinking." Shui Wuyin cut him off. "I've protected the families of the Nine Heavens Dictum's brothers. There's only one request, or rather, one condition for everyone. If they're caught, the faster they die, the better." Yin Yang felt a pang in his heart as he fell silent. Chapter 797. Shui Wuyin was silent as well. Only then did he continue to speak clearly. "We can't afford to be careless now. I'm willing to believe in all the Nine Heavens Dictum brothers, that they're not afraid of death, that they're loyal. But the reality is, there are those who can't hold on. That's why 19 of our brothers have died." Shui Wuyin sighed softly. Actually, there were only 7 people who gave themselves away in the beginning, and these 7 people were all from the outermost part of the Nine Heavens Dictum. Their knowledge was limited. If they could keep it a secret, there wouldn't be any subsequent losses. But they couldn't keep it a secret. Through them, their superiors were found out. The superiors couldn't stand the torture, so they found out about their superiors. That's how it turned into the 19 brothers we've lost now. I've given strict orders since the first batch of superiors were found out. Then, I ordered all of them to lie low. That's why we've only lost 19. Shui Wuyin said coldly, "If I'd been a step later, I'm afraid I'd be in the Four Seasons Tower's hands now. That's the loss of thousands or even tens of thousands of lives. I don't want to bear this loss." Yin Yang said with a dark expression, "You don't have to explain to me. I understand your reason for doing this, it's just that I can't accept it at the moment. If it were me, I'd definitely make the same decision as you." He sighed softly. "It's a pity, for the 19 brothers." Shui Wuyin was silent for a long time before he finally spoke slowly, "Yes. After all, the martial world's methods of torture are much crueler than the public's. There are many people in this world who are unafraid of death, but there are very few who are unyielding." He said coldly, "Brothers, as long as they didn't seek death immediately, it's expected that they couldn't take it in the end. It's reasonable. I really can't blame them. The Nine Heavens Dictum's brothers are already the highest I've seen in my life." Yin Yang was silent for a moment before he said, "I understand. Unafraid of death and unyielding have never meant the same thing. Death, everything was over. As a martial world person, most of them could accept death calmly despite being afraid of it. But what was most unbearable was the endless torture it made it hard for people to even live in a situation of life and death. At the end of the day, humans were just flesh and blood." He paused for a moment before continuing, "The families of the 19 brothers who have already been sacrificed must be taken good care of. The Nine Heavens Dictum will be responsible for raising their children until they become talents, and they cannot slack off. Whether they can or can't, we're all brothers of the Nine Heavens Dictum, it's the same in life and death." Yin Yang said in anguish, "It's not shameful to be unable to withstand the Four Seasons Tower's torture. If it were you or me, we might not be able to hold on until the end." Shui Wuyin replied, "I understand. I will make arrangements." Then he asked, "But what should we do now? How do I continue to move?" Now that the situation has reversed, our situation is extremely unfavorable. Yin Yang said, the Nine Heavens dictum doesn't need to do anything else. The battle against the Four Seasons Tower is too high a level. Even gathering information is meaningless. So, what I mean is, continue to lie low, until this matter is completely over, then we can talk about the follow-up. Shui Wuyin said, it's over? Yin Yang said solemnly, that's right, it is the end. The end means that either I die or the Four Seasons Tower is completely annihilated. To me and Supreme Cloud, the Nine Heavens dictum subordinates are no longer a help, but Shui Wuyin kept quiet for a while and said, they are indeed a burden. I've also realized that the Nine Heavens dictum's help to you is getting lesser and lesser, almost negligible. They're really only a burden. The competition between high-level cultivators is indeed beyond our power. Yin Yang was even more silent than Shui Wuyin, remaining silent for a long time. After a long time, he sighed deeply and lifted his head to look at the sky, murmuring, it's still possible to be of help to me, but if I were to do so, I'm afraid that among the 9,000 brothers of the Nine Heavens dictum, less than 50 will be able to survive. Even including their families, this will be a famine of 50 to 60,000 people. Wuyin, you understand? Shui Wuyin nodded slowly. I understand. That's why I understand you even more. Why you've always been remote, why you've passed the authority to me while you've completely ignored it, almost completely cutting yourself off from the internal workings of the Nine Heavens dictum. Yin Yang kept quiet for a while and said, whether it's the Nine Supremes or Supreme Cloud, they can't exist forever. No matter how worthy Supreme Wit is, there will be times when he makes a mistake. Once he makes a mistake, it could be the end of the world. Shui Wuyin chuckled mockingly. Especially when you're still worried about keeping the bow after you've served your purpose? Yin Yang chuckled and said, I won't anymore, because this bow of mine can no longer be kept by anyone. There's only one reason why the Nine Supremes and Supreme Cloud can't exist forever. He said in a low voice, because Yutong is our own country. We can't be the source of chaos, that's all. Shui Wuyin said mockingly, you're quite aware of this. Yin Yang smiled faintly and said, are you feeling uncomfortable? Of course I'm feeling uncomfortable. Shui Wuyin said angrily, King threw such a huge burden on me and even acted like you're going to leave at any time. What should I do? I have nowhere to go, and I can't even go with you. Tens of thousands of people are counting on me. How can I be comfortable? You and the Nine Heavens dictum's people are Yutong's people, but your father is not Yutong's people. What do your own countries and contributions have to do with your father? Your father is willing to help you because of Ji Lingfeng, because of my brother Feng. Do you really think that your father has noble sentiments? You can leave after you've accomplished your mission, but what about the Nine Heavens dictum's people after you've left? I can't give them official positions on the surface, they're not willing to turn into the martial world's underworld either. There's no way forward or retreat, and you still want me to be happy? Where's your intelligence? Supreme Wit? Bullsh *T Supreme Wit. In the entire Tianxian world, no one other than Shui Wuyin would dare call himself a Bullsh *T Supreme Wit in front of everyone or behind their backs. It was unprecedented and unparalleled throughout the ages. Yin Yang kept quiet for a bit and said, the fate of the Nine Heavens dictum's people is indeed what I want to talk to you about. If you want to continue, I'll completely wash my hands of this. The Nine Heavens dictum will only be held by you from now on, and will no longer belong to the Nine Supremes. On the other hand, if you don't want to continue, I can be responsible for finding another way out for everyone. Chapter 798. Shui Wuyin was silent once more. I need to think about it. I shouldn't doubt your trust, but you're gone. It's a foregone conclusion that you'll leave this world. Your trust can be effective for 3 to 5 years, 10 to 20 years, but what about after that? Yin Yang nodded and gave him a manuscript. I understand your concerns and I know that you're sincere towards the people of 9 heavens. This is what I've promised you before. As long as you cultivate according to this, your physique and all the cultivation problems that might arise can be solved. Shui Wuyin stared at the mystical book in a daze. All right. Why did you choose to give it to me now? The battle against the 4 Seasons Tower is imminent. If I die, Yin Yang smiled faintly and tossed the mystical book into Shui Wuyin's embrace. Shui Wuyin said, actually, there's something I'm curious about. Perhaps I should say that I can't figure it out. Yin Yang said in a relaxed tone, you want to say why I didn't consider using the school of Kismet State, right? Exactly. From what I see, we have too many ways to drive the tiger to devour the wolf, to let the 4 Seasons Tower and the school of Kismet State fight each other. They've never been on the same side anyway, Shui Wuyin answered. It's a pity that the school of Kismet State is formidable and can be called the top hidden sect in the world, but there's still a huge gap compared to the 4 Seasons Tower. Compared to the 4 Seasons Tower, they're just a slightly larger man-eating ant. Although they can be lethal, they're still ants. Also, although the school of Kismet State is rather capable, it's been too long since they've left the mortal realm. They're too far away. Moreover, they've always been high and mighty, collaborating with the imperial power. Therefore, they're no longer vigilant against the schemes and traps of the mortal realm. Only when they're targeted can they be set up with ease and annihilated. If by any chance, the 4 Seasons Tower's brains are added to the school of Kismet State, once these two forces join forces, we'll be doomed eternally. Although I know that this might save me some energy, I don't dare to take the risk. For now, not taking risks is the best plan. Yin Yang smiled faintly. For example, if the 4 Seasons Tower had come up with a plan to confer titles as a trap, there would never have been a situation where we succeeded in one strike and the entire sect was annihilated. With such a premise, there was no need to do anything unnecessary to avoid the possibility of additional problems arising. Shui Wuyin nodded slowly. So that's how it is. Indeed. Yin Yang took out another spatial ring and passed it to Shui Wuyin. There's a batch of valuables in here, including gold, silver, jade, and a considerable amount of banknotes. During this period of time when the 9 Heavens Dictum brothers lay dormant and in the future. Shui Wuyin looked at the spatial ring and muttered to himself for a long time before saying with difficulty, all right. He lifted his head to look at Yin Yang and said, you've arranged everything so thoroughly now. What is your ultimate goal? Yin Yang stood up and said softly, didn't you all say that I'm supreme wit? I'm used to arranging everything. Is it only a habit? Shui Wuyin asked again. However, when he asked the question, Yin Yang was no longer in front of him. Yin Xiaoyao looked at Yin Yang who was opposite him. In this secret chamber of the imperial palace, he carefully looked up and down at his son. His face was as handsome as ever. It was as if he had returned to the past, the face of a young man that was filled with determination, coldness, and calmness, but was also immature. Now, although he was untouched by the hardships, the corners of his eyes and the tips of his brows had changed a lot. Why did you suddenly think of talking to me? Yin Xiaoyao asked in an unusually gentle tone. I want to fight the 4 Seasons Tower. Yin Yang said calmly, I'm not too confident about this battle, so I need to make some arrangements beforehand. Yin Xiaoyao turned his head abruptly, his expression changing abruptly. Why are you in such a hurry? Why are you in such a hurry? Yin Yang kept quiet for a moment and said, it's precisely because we don't need to be in a hurry that we're going to fight. Yutong's path has been paved. Unifying Tianxian is only a matter of time. The longer it drags on, the more disadvantageous the situation will be for the 4 Seasons Tower. They won't give me more time. Besides, Yutong won't give me too much time either. Although this battle was rushed, it doesn't matter if I'm dead or alive. Everything will calm down. Yin Xiaoyao heaved a long sigh. Yin Yang had made his words very clear. At least, he understood everything. It was destined that Supreme Cloud could not participate in this war of unification. Supreme Cloud was already higher than the imperial power, a lofty existence that was like a legend in the mortal world. If he were to contribute more in the war of unification, the balance that was barely maintained now would definitely be broken. The emperor might still be indifferent and could even worship Supreme Cloud like a god, but Yun Yang himself had to be concerned. The imperial court and the people would not be indifferent, neither would Supreme Cloud's enemies. Yutang's enemies would not be indifferent either. Therefore, Yin Yang wanted to disappear. And the disappearance of this opportunity, no matter who it was just the right time. Of course, Supreme Cloud was an exception. You said that the situation will become more disadvantageous to the Four Seasons Tower if the stalemate continues. Then let it continue. As long as my royal brother doesn't mind, so what if the others do?